what's wrong with the people that talk?
Where are you on?
Sit in the front row or sit next to Ed. or Paul.
I need you to hit from here.
I'm going to be able to point you out.
It's like going to church. Nobody wants to sit in the row.
Did the green light go on? Not too bad. Okay, I think we're on air. Yes, and I'm going to start the recorder. Okay, this is the special January 22nd meeting of the Mashpee Sewer Commission and jointly with
the Falmouth Water Quality Management Committee. This is worth noting. I think it's the first joint meeting of a regional nature in the Upper Cape dealing with water quality issues, and we're very pleased to be invited and happy to be here.
Wonderful. Good. I think the first thing to do, since we haven't all met, is to go around the table and introduce you to, this is the Mashpee Sewer Commission. We have one member that's supposed to be here but isn't, and another guy who told us he wasn't going to be here, so there are, Joe Lyons couldn't be here. Oscar was supposed to be, but isn't. Any case, we have...
Glenn Santos.
And Glenn's background is that he's a former Board of Health member in Mashpee for 8 years, and Tom Burns knows how to run sewage treatment plants.
I have a grade 5 waste treatment license that I let go a couple years ago, but I do have one.
Mark Gurney.
He's on the Conservation Commission, doesn't want to admit it. Tom Fodala, Town Planner and the Chairman of the Mashpee Sewer Commission. And as I said, there are 2 other members, but they're not here.
Eric Turkington, Chairman of the Falmouth Water Quality Committee, and we have two former state reps and 3 former selectmen, and an economist, a world-famous scientist, and a retired world-famous scientist on our board.
You got us beat by a mile.
Virginia Valiela.
Matthew Patrick. I have to push this.
Yeah.
Matthew Patrick.
Steve Layton.
No, turn it off. But you want the green light on.
And Wynn Monroe.
Ron Zweig.
And missing is Steve Rafferty, but he may be here yet.
Okay. And, well, the main point of our agenda is to have a presentation delivered to us by Brian Howes and the people of SMAST. I assume everybody knows what SMAST is, regarding their draft MEP report for Waquoit Bay, Eel Pond, and Childs River. And that's going to be seen on these screens up above here, so wherever you're sitting, you twist your head one way or the other. And that's, that'll go on television as well. And it's also a first, and if it's working, this is the first time we've got a broadcast that is going both to Mashpee and to Falmouth Cable TV at the same time, so hi, Falmouth. You're on, Brian.
You ever do one of those things where you look up at the screen and you say, I thought I changed that, do I have the right one?
Yeah, and I noticed before that is the screen working for you on the laptop? Because
Yeah, we're good.
Oh, okay, it wasn't working for me
Just wanted to
before.
check, it's so embarrassing. So Steve Rafferty is the only smart one, because our guests from Falmouth sat through the first 20 minutes of this last Thursday and were very nice about it. Now they're going to sit through the intro part again, but because there's people and you people sat through it for Poppy and the scenarios, but because there's new people always watching on TV, then, you know, we go through it each time, so I asked for some forbearance. The other thing is I'm still stuck on the 3 selectmen and 2, I guess I get that, 3 selectmen, 2.
We're all
I get it.
selected.
And 2 reps, yeah. Okay. All right. The topic tonight is really to go through the Massachusetts Estuaries project analysis for Waquoit Bay. We actually, because they share waters, we link together, because nature's done it, the Eel Pond Eel River system with the Waquoit Bay system. And of course, this is probably one of the more complex estuarine systems in southeastern Massachusetts, and not because of its size, but because it has so many different tributaries to it. There's Yahoo Pond, Hamlin Pond, plus with their tidal rivers, Quashnet River, Childs River, Wheel Pond, Secret River, and then the main bay of Quaid and Sage Lot Pond. All of those different basins all had to be assessed and had to be linked together numerically for the modeling, but more importantly, also had to develop their own thresholds psychologically. And so we'll go through that tonight. And this is actually, Eric, the first time that I've been to one of these where whole committees came together from multiple towns. We've had discussions, usually one or two people might show up, but this is the first time I think that I've been at a joint meeting for any of our stuff, and that's not on the Cape, that's all of southeastern Mass.
By the way, I'd just like to point out, we also have our representative from DEP here, the esteemed Brian Dudley, in the audience, former Selectman Chuck Green, who's now representing for the Tribal Council. Paul Gobel, by the way, the fellow in the blue with the blue tie, is our Sewer Commission Administrator. Sitting next to him is Jeff Gregg, who is our consultant from GHD working on our plan. And you have your Jerry Batamas back there, who's your wastewater guy.
And we have a wastewater gal.
Yeah, see a
wastewater
carpus.
gal too, okay.
And the
And
Cape Cod Commission's represented,
where? Where's the Cape Cod
Cape
Commission?
Cod Commission.
Oh, there it is. Oh,
Then we have
there he
Dave
is. Heidi
DiLorenzo
Grant,
from
Cape Cod
DEP.
Commission at Eichner. So it's an esteemed
Dave.
group. We have our Waterways Commission Chairman.
Yeah, it goes on it.
So nice of you guys to come. We finally got an audience.
Well, they can carry it back to their various constituencies. is
Yes,
the
all
idea.
right. Well,
And plus,
back to
bring
serious
forward
business.
questions from their constituencies tonight, which has me always a little nervous. But all right, the MEP, the Estuaries Project, was started and has run as a partnership with DEP, who works on the regulatory, is in charge of the Clean Water Act for the state and the Wetlands Protection Act for the state. And they deal with the regulatory aspects of impaired waters. If waters are impaired, then there have to be TMDLs written, which is total maximum daily load, which is a sort of not so good term, but what it really means is you have to come up with a plan for restoring those impaired waters. And that's a regulatory process that falls under DEP's purview. SMAST at the University of Massachusetts Dartmouth does the science assessment and modeling. We, of course, don't do it alone. We have a variety of agencies and really scientists and engineers that work for us, starting at the Cape Cod Commission, where Tom's been involved from the beginning, and others as well. We've done a lot of GIS work. County has also been very generous to the towns on the Cape of providing matching funds as well to offset town costs. Applied Coastal, which is right here in Mashpee, does a lot of the modeling. SMAST, of course, and then DEP. And USGS did our watershed delineations. So they do the groundwater modeling to set the delineations for our analysis. These are real partners in that they all do real things. Without any one of them, we wouldn't have a project. It's not one of the just happy time partnerships. It's real work. They've saved the towns a tremendous amount of money. There's two primary issues affecting estuaries and embayments throughout southeastern Massachusetts. The primary one that we're going to be talking about tonight is nitrogen overloading. You read about it in Cape Cod Times now. Even it's a common part of discussion. It's actually sort of it's somewhat happy in the sense that now people are talking about it. It's part of election cycles now. It's unhappy in the sense that it's going to cost us a lot of time, money, and effort to fix the problem. And the reason the problem needs to be fixed is that much of our economy is based on tourism still, and a lot of the town finances are based on property values. And the problem with nitrogen enrichment is we get wholesale decline in estuarine health from shifting land use. In other words, more people come in, build primarily on septic systems, and we get nitrogen going in the bays, which causes impairment. Impairment's a fancy word, that we use in the regulatory place, but what we're really talking about is loss of use by people of the estuary. It either looks bad, smells bad, or you are worried that you can't go fishing because of maybe number two, which is bacterial contamination, but really the problem is there's no fish to fish. And that's a real problem when people are coming here because they want to be near the water to enjoy it, and there's no fish or shellfish left because we've destroyed the habitat. That's what we're talking about tonight, is that habitat destruction and how to bring it back. It's always important when you do projects like this to make sure that what you're doing is reviewed independently. This is just some of the reviews we've been through. It's a common practice in science to be reviewed. It's nothing to be worried about, and it's something that we usually benefit from. We've had at least 3 or 4 major reviews by independent scientists. The most important one is the one on top, which was just done by the Barnstable County Peer Review Committee, which was actually a series of national experts that came in. The cost of the project was in excess of $100,000, and we had world-class experts here. We had people that wrote some of the original computer code for the models we use. We had people that sit on National Academy of Science technical review boards, and some of these people that I've known from a distance, and that they're very, very high quality. So they're above any kind of Cape Cod politics, we'll put it that way. And what they found was that the complexity of the components, the level of complexity of components that we're using in what I'm going to present tonight, are simple and parsimonious and well balanced. So what that really means, what I like, the part of that I like is that they're simple. We intentionally designed this process so that you could measure things and then compare them. It's not a lot of theory going in to link different things together. It's actually an empirical model, meaning that it is based on direct measurements in this region. And that's very important because that cuts out a lot of the uncertainty. The other thing is that the approach is appropriate, useful for evaluating alternative scenarios. Alternative scenarios are what the town of Mashpee has been doing now for ever, for a long time.
Wow.
And also what the town of Falmouth is working on now as well, and has been doing as well, particularly relative to West Falmouth Harbor. You ran a whole bunch, and for Bourne's Pond now, the bridge and things like that. So both towns here are familiar with scenarios, and those are what inform management plans. And that's very good, because the goal of this whole process is to come up with a plan and then to implement the plan so that we can have the restoration that the people want. There's 89 estuaries in southeastern Mass, as shown by the dots. We've made some real progress over the last 10 years. We've completed a lot, as you can see with the red. And what you can see for Mashpee and for Falmouth, almost all of the estuaries are completed. You can see on the south shore of the Cape. And in fact, these are them. Pompanesett Bay was one of the very first estuaries that were done, and last week Falmouth went through Falmouth Harbor, Rand's Canal, Fiddler's Cove, Wild Harbor, Quistit Harbor, which are all on Buzzards Bay side, and only 2 to go there. And tonight in the box we'll be talking about Wacoit and Eel River. The bad news is that for Falmouth, last week you heard good news. You heard, well, you have 5 small estuaries. They're a little impaired. Some of them are just recently impaired, and so when something's just recently becoming impaired, then that means that it's just slightly over the line and won't take much to get it back. Hi, Steve. See, I told you he was smart. So it just means you have to push a little bit. Now, a little bit means it won't cost you much, it won't take much time, it won't be much effort. That's a good thing. It also means all of those systems still support high-quality habitats, still today. So really what you're getting then is good news. Wacoit, no. Wacoit is one of the most impaired degraded systems in the entire MEP region. It is the poster child for macroalgal accumulations, which I'll talk about in a second. It is very large, and it's very impaired. And big means that it's going to take a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of horsepower to bring this system back completely. But it doesn't mean that you have to do it all at once either, and it doesn't mean that you can't bring it back in steps. Shown this, and you in the audience know that I've shown this slide many times. The critical piece of this is that we have this sequence from top to bottom of what happens to estuarine habitat or embayment habitat, or in this case, Wacoit Bay habitat, as we put in more and more nitrogen. First, the waters get a little turbid with phytoplankton blooms, fine. Sometimes you even can stimulate shellfish production with that, but at higher levels than what you actually get is shading at the bottom, and you go to the next step, which is loss of eelgrass beds. Eelgrass beds are really important to our resources here. They provide a number of positive benefits to people, environmental services to people that live on Cape Cod when they're there. And even to the extent that in addition to fisheries, in addition to sometimes shoreline erosion protection because they dampen the waves, all of those things, they also provide resource use for even avian fauna. So even if you don't go in the water, you don't shellfish, you don't like fish, but you like to watch birds, even at that point, you're still getting benefits out of having eelgrass in your system. All strata are positively benefit from eelgrass beds. The other piece that we get is at higher levels, then we lose the eelgrass and we start to lose the benthic animal populations, and the fish and shellfish start to go away wholesale. When you lose eelgrass beds, you lose certain fish and fisheries, but at higher levels, when you start losing the animal populations that live in the bottom, then you start losing migratory fish and a variety of other things. The reason those two are in red is those are two key regulatory targets, meaning that if they're impaired, then the system will be classified as impaired, regardless of what else is going on. Unless, of course, well, you have to prove the impairments from nitrogen, of course, but if those are impaired, then the system will require a TMDL. Either one of them. The one thing that I always like to point out at this point, though, is that we're not, although this is the regulatory piece in that you're targeting habitat quality and water quality to bring back eelgrass and benthic animal populations, what does that mean to people? What did that mean to my mom? What it meant to my mom was that if there were eelgrass beds, then there was clear water. If there were eelgrass beds, there wasn't macroalgae floating up on the beach, and you couldn't go to the beach or you couldn't walk to the water because you had to walk through all this stuff. It meant that there were fish and shellfish. It meant that there were typically sandier bottoms and there wasn't that soft, black, muddy ooze. And so all of those things she didn't know from eelgrass, but the key point was that all of the things that eelgrass and the animals like are what people like too. So restoring, it's one of the few times in my career that you're trying to restore habitat, but really what you're doing is you're also restoring those characteristics of an estuary that everybody enjoys. And that's a very good thing. At higher levels, of course, we get low oxygen in the bays. The south-facing estuaries on Cape Cod typically have low oxygen in them. Frequently, they have fish kills in the summer. Not all of them, but it jumps around. It could be Swan Pond and Green Pond one year. It could be Upper Great Pond one year. It could be Mashpee River or Santuit or Shoestring Bay, whatever. It could be a variety of things. It jumps around depending on the physics and the meteorology that's going on. But the ultimate cause of that is nitrogen overloading. And at higher level still, then you get these macroalgal accumulations. Waquoit Bay had the largest macroalgal event at the surface that anybody had seen in decades, and that occurred around 2001, 2002, 2003, something like that. The issue, though, was it had been known by researchers, mainly at the MBL, it had been known by them for 20 years that the bottom of Waquoit Bay was a foot or 2 feet thick in macroalgal accumulation every summer. So the point that it became reality to people that had floated to the surface and they saw it, they got upset. But in reality, the bay had pretty well been dead for about 20 years at least prior to that point. And in fact, some parts of Waquoit Bay, all the way back into the 60s, had large macroalgal accumulations, such as in Quashnet River. That was pointed out by Curley in '71. Okay, enough of that. It's not, but just so you don't think it's Waquoit Bay is the only problem. This is a global problem. Seagrasses have been lost worldwide. 2/3 of seagrass habitat worldwide. It's not all eelgrass, of course. There's a variety of different types of seagrass, but they all suffer from the same types of things. Mainly turbidity, mainly nutrient overloading. There's other things as well, but those are the dominant ones worldwide. We've lost 2/3 of global seagrass habitat, and we've lost more than 50% of our habitat already in southeastern Massachusetts. Part of the reason that we don't know, that we say greater than 50% is we're being conservative, because we don't actually know exactly how much habitat yet. We're still assessing that there was originally in southeastern Massachusetts. The other thing that's even more frightening, though, is that we have impaired or degraded more than half of the benthic habitat. And that means that the things that rely on that, like migratory fish and certain fisheries type fish, they don't have their food source anymore. So while we're worried about the predators, we should be worrying about what they eat, because that's not there anymore. All right, old figure. It's from Falmouth. I always try to pull out a town one. So this one's from Falmouth. I showed it the other night as well. This is just, the bars just represent numbers of animals. They were sorted to species and all that, but that's not the point I'm trying to make. The key point is, when you look at that graph, I always do this to my students, what do you see? And they start trying to tell me all this fancy theory. But in reality, what you see is big bars, no bars. And the key point is by the time you get to July, August, the animals have died out. And in fact, in August, the bottom had no macrofauna, meaning nothing bigger than half a millimeter. Really, really tiny stuff alive in the bottom of this entire basin, okay? And that's very common. It happens. You'll see it tonight as well in some of the Quoit basins are this way. Some of the Quoit basins have lost their eelgrass. That's the same thing. They've lost their animals completely, pretty much. I mean, completely to me is 99.9% complete. And, and we've seen all of these things that we're talking about as being impairment and degradation we're seeing in the Quoit system, different basins of the Quoit system. The critical thing in putting this up, though, too, is to get people to think that we focused the estuaries project analysis on the summer period. We focused it on the summer period because that's the period of high biological activity, and that's when systems get stressed. This evidences that in the fact that if we could carry that nice red big June bar through to September, October would be fine, because these estuaries, even with Quoit, has clear water and fairly high water quality in the winter when it's cold and things aren't moving and active and things like that. But in the summer, when the system is highly biologically active, we see the oxygen depletions, we see the algal blooms, and so we focused our analysis there. And that's also, of course, when that's the filter, that's the ecological stress filter that the system has to survive through. Well, okay, all that being said, if you have a nutrient problem, then how do you restore it? And the only really way to do it is to manage the nitrogen that goes in. It's the only way that we know to restore these systems. There's nothing we can sprinkle on them that will make them better. But there are two ways to restore it, and people frequently forget that. One is to control watershed nitrogen inputs, which is a myriad of ways to control nitrogen inputs coming from the watershed, and the other is to maximize the tidal flushing. Bourne's Pond in Falmouth is the classic potential improvement. Won't cure the problem, but it'll certainly help it by maximizing tidal flushing. Popponesset Bay is not something that can be restored by tidal flushing. Popponesset Bay is the one of the first examples that we have of a system where people figured it out, set up a revolving fund for dredging, and dredge that inlet every year, every time it gets even a little occluded, to maximize the flow through it. So it's already been improved to its maximum flushing rate. Now the management is to continue that practice to keep that flushing occurring. All right, the approach we use, and it's really important, it's site-specific and data-driven. And we built this, what I'm going to talk about tonight is for Quoit Bay and Eel Pond, Eel River. It's not something that we could just all of a sudden start just sticking in a few new numbers and it becomes, you know, Pleasant Bay or something. This is the Quoit Bay, Eel River model and approach. It's not a push-button model, as you'll see. It's a series of 4 models that are linked by people, scientists and engineers, that have to quality assure the data that comes out of one before they put it into the next model down the road. The one thing, though, is the watershed nitrogen loading module is given to the towns. It's a public document. It's fully operational. People, if they get interested, can go in and change terms and see what happens. When Greg just first picked up his first nitrogen loading model, he said, this won't be hard. And he was a lot taller and happier then, but I think he's figured it out. So the engineering firms use these a lot to be able to start on the what-if scenarios. Because frequently management, like I said, it's either going to be something to do with tidal flushing or something to do with loading. That is the loading module. And so That's what you start manipulating to see, well, if we sewer this, or if we reroute an effluent, or if we put in a nitrogen-removing wetland, whatever, what would the effect be on the estuary? And that's the module you need to do that. And then in the future, as we go through this whole process, we've continued to run scenarios and keep this alive now for, what, 10, 11 years now, 12 years now for the communities to use. Not going to go through this in any detail other than to say that watershed delineation model just tells us what areas of land contribute to what water bodies. We use that model to delineate not just the land contributing to the estuary as a whole, but also to each major pond, stream, and sub-basin of the estuary. So it wouldn't just be one number going into Aquit Bay, it would be the load into, say, the Quashnet River, which in part passes through, say, Johns Pond. So we have to then look at Johns Pond and through the groundwater again, and then into Quashnet. We do that. There were 48 sub-watersheds delineated for this system. The watershed end loading model then takes those delineations of all those little basins and streams and ponds, and then starts working on a parcel basis to generate a nitrogen load, and I'll show you that in a second. We also have a hydrodynamic model, which is the mixing. If these were lakes, it would be a lot easier, because the residence time in lakes around here, a good kettle lake is a year, at least 6 months, and sometimes 2 years or more. And nutrients go in, cycle in the bay, and then recharge downstream. But in estuaries, the tide comes in and out twice a day. And so what we get is we get all this mixing going on and dispersion going on within the system, and it's something that you can't do on the back of an envelope. Some of the lake stuff we do on the back of an envelope. We don't admit it's an envelope. It is. But this we need actually a numerical model to deal with. And then the nitrogen loading model is really the nitrogen coming in from the watershed. The atmosphere is counted as well. We do that. Direct fall on the bay. We mix it up with the hydro model, and we generate the gradients of nitrogen that should exist within that bay if all our numbers are right. Everybody gets hung up on all that. In reality, you don't need any of it to set a threshold. None of it. The only thing the model is really for is it helps to reduce some of the uncertainty. We can refine the nitrogen values, the tidally average nitrogen value for a system, for a point in the system, because as the tide comes in, clean water comes in, and the nitrogen concentrations at every station in the estuary drop, and then on the ebb tide, the bad water goes out, and the nitrogen levels at all sites in the estuary go up. So you have a range at every site. Where you collect your monitoring data, he says, well, it's monitoring, we'll do that. But if everybody collected at a different point, you have just this big blur of points. And the other piece is that if you even try to collect at the same point, what you start getting is more and more uncertainty around your final number. And we want to get rid of uncertainty. But as I say, you don't need any of that. You could stick with the monitoring data if it was consistently collected, as it has been in Waquoit, and you could just go straight to the dissolved oxygen values, the eelgrass and infauna values, things you can measure. You can come up with thresholds that way. We used to do that for years before we had these models. So it can be done, but then you start getting the much bigger errors. Used to be the errors on these were plus or minus 50%, sometimes plus or minus 100%. Now we're dealing more with around that plus or minus 10%. And that's the level of uncertainty you need for this type of approach. So I'll show you this in a second. We end up with the nitrogen levels and then the habitat variables that you can measure, and you come up with a threshold. The threshold development is really the nitrogen target for restoration of your system if it's impaired. If it's not impaired, then it would be the number that you wouldn't want to exceed in the future should development continue. Then when we're done with the thresholds development, DEP picks up the ball, runs with it into the Clean Water Act for a TMDL, works with the towns on that. DEP will be coming to your house soon to present on the TMDL and do that. But this has to precede that activity. Tonight, for instance, has to precede that activity. Why are we so concerned about uncertainty? Well, the major reason we're concerned about uncertainty is just that if you said you had to to remove 100 pounds of nitrogen to restore a system, but your uncertainty was 50%. That means 100 pounds plus or minus 50%. But it is conservation we're talking about. It is conservative we're talking about, which means that you would be told that, well, to be sure you're going to get restoration, you need to remove the 100 plus the uncertainty. So you'd have to remove 150 pounds, which means you're doing 50, that extra 50 pounds is money you're spending for management that may or may not have an effect. But it has to be done if you have a big uncertainty. That's why we do it. All right, let's get to Equate Bay specific stuff now. Equate Bay is, I should start with, we actually completed the analysis for the eastern embayments of Equate Bay for the town of, for you guys, for Mashpee in 2005, I think it was. Getting old, but I think it was 2005. And the idea was that we would then revisit those and then incorporate them into the whole system model, because this is a very large system. And that's what we've done now here. I'm not going to spend as much time talking about those eastern embayments until the end, because we've already been talking about those in this room as we've been running scenarios. They're well down the road. All right. For Equate, these are tidal rivers. Little River and Great River are tidal rivers which run from the main bay up into Hamlin and Yahoo Pond. Quashnet River is a drowned river valley. I mean, the river, Quashnet River comes down fresh, or Moonicus comes down fresh, eroded this valley, and now that's the estuarine part. Childs River is the same way, comes down, it's all salt water in here. Sea Pit River is just the connection between, and you can call this anything you want. I mean, this could be the lower Childs. We actually just called it the east branch of Eel River. This is the west branch of Eel River, and this is Eel Pond. It's a very large system, and all of these, we had to look at all of these systems. Oh, and Sage Lap Pond down here is a salt marsh dominated tidal pond right down near the inlet. Years ago, we set up, the town of Mashpee set up a water quality monitoring program. It's since been refined to include the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, and actually in a partnership with the University of Massachusetts. So it's a three-way partnership. The tribe and the town contribute to the analytical work. The university actually provides staff for some of the monitoring as well as part of its play in this. But what you can see is there's a very large number of stations in this. And the reason for the number of stations is if you just wanted to know how good this system is, you could probably drop about half the stations. But then what we do is when we set this up, we knew we were going to use it to validate the water quality model. And when you validate it, you have to match the data from each station that's measured in this program with the model data. And when you have all of these stations to match every one of them, gives you the confidence that you actually have a well put together predictive model. All right, as I said, the first thing you do is we define the watershed. We do that, and then we look inside the watershed at the sources of nitrogen, and we look at all of them that we can come up with that are, and identify wastewater, fertilized agriculture, one that's not here, impermeable surface, natural surface atmosphere. We look at landfills, we look at large-scale wastewater, packaged plants, septic systems, IA systems. All of those are broken out and identified individually in each sub-watershed. The sinks mainly stem from denitrification with wetlands. Aquifer transport we haven't found as a big sink. We've found it more as a storage term. What we find is that for aquifer transport, if you build say a big development of 300 homes, you build it and it's all on septic and it contributes to the groundwater, and the groundwater takes 7 years to make it to the bay, but we did our analysis 5 years after it was built, then all of that load would go into some future build-out load because it hasn't hit the bay yet. And much of our world is trying to identify when things hit the bay, because we want to make sure that we're identifying the sources that are, and the load that is causing the impairment or keeping the thing healthy today not something that hasn't yet hit yet. In the case of West Falmouth Harbor, where the town invested $13 million in improving the treatment plant effluent significantly, like many-fold, in that particular system, that went into build-out because it took, say, 6-7 years for that plume to reach the estuary, and at the time we did our analysis, hadn't reached the estuary yet. So actually, the build-out load was better than the present load for that system. But all of those timing things have to be taken into account in this analysis. All right, these are watersheds. These red lines say here in this one, this green watershed 41 and 42, that line represents a 10-year travel time to a Shumet Pond. Above the line, it takes more than 10 years. Below the line, it takes less than 10 years to reach a Shumet Pond. Same thing with Johns Pond. The green up here represent watersheds to major freshwater ponds, but they all eventually cut down to the bay. Some of a Shumet, sort of a little different, but nonetheless, these contribute to the ponds and then contribute back into the aquifer or go into a river and then to the bay. But all of these represent, like Sagelot Pond has its own watershed, Quashed, it goes on and on. This is all in the report. The critical piece here is that you have the watershed to each major surface water body, be it fresh, salt. And that's important because as nitrogen passes through a pond, like a
Brian, could
Shumet
you
Pond.
stop for a second? We're supposed to be taping this. We have no secretary. Let me change the tape.
I knew I'd miss her when I saw she wasn't here.
Figure out how to do this. Let's see.
You allowed to say secretary?
Keep your dates.
It's an executive assistant.
He's the board secretary for the sewer commission, Jan. I forgot to turn, I don't know how much we missed. She'll get to see this. This is also being recorded, by the way. The video recording will be available ultimately on the town of Mashpee's wastewater sewer commission website. And if you guys would like a DVR of it, we can get that to you if you'd like.
And these, I should just add for Mashpee that these watersheds here are the same watersheds that are nothing was changed because it was the same model that generated all of them. It's just you didn't get them until we did the whole deal. All right. This wasn't the first watershed that was developed for this system. The Cape Cod Commission put out their regulatory watershed for Waquoit Bay and its environs in '98. The more detailed analysis we did has some interesting little subtle differences, has many more sub-watersheds to it because of the way our analysis works. We need all those freshwater basins. But really, in total, it's only about 6% larger and not much different in load, in fact. But there are some important differences. Well, what we do, it's pretty simple-minded, is we go into each one of these watersheds, and we'll take 17, for instance. So we go into the watershed to Yehu Pond. We go to the town. We get the assessor's data. We talk to the town planners. We get each parcel identified that exists within that watershed. That means each property. If there's two properties owned by one person, we get both of them separately. So we have each individual parcel within each one of these watersheds. But within one watershed, you say, okay, we get all the parcels where they are. From that, we can also then get water use data from the town, from the water departments or from the town, depending on who delivers the water to your house. We get those water use records, and from the water use to each parcel, we can generate a wastewater load, the wastewater flow. And we do not have to then be as concerned as for instance, town of Mashpee. I think that summer residency is, 40% now of the properties are seasonal? Something like that, Tom? 40%?
Currently, it's about 37% summer only. We're getting
Making
more
my
year-round.
life hard.
Yeah.
40%,
About 40.
Could be less.
It used to be
Could even be
45% year-round,
37.
now it's 63% year-round. So.
But in any case, the point is that's a large potential error if you can't account for when people show up, how many people are there. So the way that you get around that is water going into a house on the Cape almost all of it, about 90% of it goes for generating, on average, goes for generating wastewater, about 90%. And everybody will say, well, but Joey has a swimming pool, Fred waters his lawn every week. Right, but on average, when you take thousands of people, you end up that it averages out to about 90% is going to wastewater. And Jeff has to shake his head yes, because those are the engineering numbers as well. So, when we looked at this system, we found that 75% of the nitrogen load, so wait a minute, when we're in this little watershed here, we look at every parcel, we generate the wastewater loads, we look at fertilizers, impervious surface area to get stormwater runoff, we look at natural surfaces, because even in a residential neighborhood, there's a lot of area that still has trees on it, the border areas, the buffer areas, vacant lots, all that. We get natural areas as well. We get a whole variety of things. We add them all up, the nitrogen loads from each one all up. We add the areas up as well. We add the water that is contributed to the aquifer from each one of them as well. Add all those up, and then we have just that little watershed. And then we do it for all the watersheds, the same thing, and then we get the whole load to the estuary. In this system, 75% of the nitrogen load is within 10 years travel time to the bay. A lot of the reason for that is this is a lot of the base, and there's just not much load coming out of MMR towards Wacoit in terms of nitrogen. So although it's further away, we're just not a lot of load up there. A lot of the load is coming from these closer areas. Of the 25%, most of that is relatively old. I mean, there hasn't been too much development, not certainly like the boom days of the 90s. So a lot of the areas when we look at, we haven't seen large developments that we couldn't account for. If we find a large development, then it goes into build out if it's more than 10 years travel time away, okay? When you look at these, this is just, you roll them all up, you look at the whole system. This is all the load for the whole of Wacoit. 56% is coming from septic, that's the gray. 9% from fertilizers, 10% from impervious surface runoff. 21%, a fifth of the load to this system is atmospheric deposition, either rain or dry fall on the estuary itself. And the reason for that is that it's big like that is because it has a big bay. Wacoit Bay is big relative to the amount of land that contributes to it. If you look at some systems like Green Pond, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it sticks in my mind, it's over 20 acres of land for every 1 acre of bay surface. Wacoit is much smaller than that. The ratio is much smaller. So with that in mind, then of course that's going to be relatively large. And there's also this 4% natural surfaces, and that's not because natural surfaces put out a lot of nitrogen, it's just that there's a lot of open space, there's a lot of conservation land, a lot of that gray area was public service land, that's forests and fields. That does put out a little bit of nitrogen, but not much, so it ends up a total of about 4%. And then we can look at the different breakdowns in here. Of course, when you go into say, Eel Pond even, Eel Pond's a much smaller basin, so the bay water itself relative to the watershed that contributes to it is much smaller than the main bay, the whole system, and so it's only 12% atmospheric. And Charles River, of course, has just that tiny little water sheet, and so really there's only 7% is atmospheric deposition here. And the other numbers go up and change accordingly. If you're doing management, though, this is great to have because we need that for the modeling. You need to have all the nitrogen sources accounted for because those are the inputs. But if you're doing management, these are the ones that you can potentially manage. And what I mean by potentially, it's going to be very difficult to manage impervious surfaces, for instance. But there are things you can do. There are definitely tools that can be used to cut down on that load. Same thing with fertilizers. You can manage them a bit. But the other piece is what these demonstrate are these very large contributions of the controllable load, not the total load, the controllable load, that are wastewater. And that is why Cape-wide everybody is running around thinking that the only solution is wastewater, is because they see these big numbers and they say, well, of course we can take a chunk out of that big number. But in fact, there are other ways to deal with wastewater and all the loads than just sewering. However, for a system like Wacoit, it's going to be very difficult to not attack the wastewater piece somehow, whether that be some innovative system in a home, whether it be a cluster of systems, treatment systems, whether it be a large system, that's up to the towns to decide. There's also other things that can be done relative to intercepting some of this before it hits the bay, but we can talk about that later. Okay. We also look at build-out, as you can imagine. We go parcel by parcel. We talk to the towns. We get a feel for what mainly the planners feel, not just under current zoning, but what they feel is the likely build-out as well, not just rote current zoning. And what we find is that there's a potential very large increase in nitrogen load to equate, which is very bad news, because there's so much open space. It came as sort of a surprise to me. Please don't say we just bought a property, so it changed the report. Well,
Just to your list, a lot of the build-out development has already been permitted. It's not just a guess, or it's not just zoning, it's already been permitted, so that's where
I
a lot
have
of
to
it
sell my
comes
house in Mashpee.
Yeah.
So, but that's a large increase, and that gives us heartburn, because we have to deal with that in any planning. You can't just, if it's impaired and you bring it back under existing conditions, that's great, but then if you increase the load, then all your good works get undone. So it has to be taken into account. Okay, one of the other things we do, though, is we don't just do that parcel analysis. We also look at, we put in stream gauges. We put one here in the Charles River, just above where the tide hits, and we put one on the Quashnet River, again, above the reach of the tide. And at those sites, we measure the amount of fresh water that comes down, and we measure the amount of nitrogen that passes by them. Charles River gauge was in for at least a little over 24 months. And what we get is a pretty good flow and load estimate from there. We compare that to long-term records. It's a long-term record for the Quashnet because it's USGS flow gauge. We correct for if there's, it's a dry year, wet year, all that. But these are groundwater fed streams, and they don't vary as much as like the Mississippi right now that is aground. The barges are running aground. They tend to keep flow in them. The reason we do this, though, is we can then compare those flows and those nitrogen loads to the actual, use those as the measured data and compare those to the model data. That's another way that we confirm the area of the recharge, because our watershed model gives us a flow measurement, and it also allows us to determine the actual nitrogen load entering through these two systems, which we then can compare to the watershed model. Yeah, Mark?
Do you include the 1 million gallons a day in the Quashnet River coming out of the Air Force pumping?
Do we include the Air Force pumping water?
Yeah.
If it's above the gauge, we get it.
It's above the gauge, certainly.
Then we get it.
And there's like 1 million gallons a day, so it's...
We get it. If it was going in
It was.
2002, 2003, we get it. And it's really important because these are also confirmatory steps, but they also allow us to determine if nitrogen is being removed in transport through these surface water bodies and the lakes which feed them, which is very important. All right. Now, hydrodynamic analysis, that's one type of, that's a validation of the watershed model. We use the stream gauges. We also can validate or confirm the hydrodynamic model by measuring the water level changes in the bay, which is the blue line, and then modeling one of the outputs of the model can just be to tell me what the stage is at any one point in the bay, and that's the red line in both of these. And as you can see, they agree really within 1% or 2, and that's the way it should be. This is just physics. It should be very straightforward if you do it right. Again, so it's just another validation step. The model itself uses this bathymetry that we generated. We do detailed bathymetry of the system. The blue should be deep, I hope. And what you can see is there's a deep basin at the head of the bay. In the middle, it shoals up a little bit here. There's a deep basin in Yehu Pond. And the Charles River, Seepit River, and east arm of Eel River are relatively deep channels as well. The rest is relatively shallow. This depth here and some of these depths help to explain the low oxygen conditions that occur in the summer, particularly in Yehu Pond. It's a deep basin. It comes in shallow. Material goes in here and is deposited. So it becomes more sensitive to nitrogen loading at that point because it can't mix from top to bottom and it goes anoxic.
Are these measurements in feet
I see elevation up there. Are these feet or meters?
Oh, they're feet, probably. It's engineers, it's feet. No, it is, it's
Oh,
feet.
sure.
I mean, I know it's feet. And
Okay. So deep is 6 feet.
yeah, it's 2-3 meters is this area up in here.
Yeah, okay, just,
The whole system's relatively shallow, but if you look
Well-
at, say, Green Pond, it's a meter.
Yeah.
It's 3 feet. So 3 feet is that color right there, that greeny blue. So most of this system is deeper than most of the south-facing systems in Falmouth, except for the main basin of Great Pond, which is also about 2 meters and some deep. Okay. This is modeled versus measured nitrogen, and I just want to emphasize that when we do our quality modeling, we put the numbers in. We say, okay, this is the load coming from the land. This is load regenerated within the system. This is atmospheric deposition. This is the tide. Mix it up and tell me what the concentration is, and that's what the blue dots are. You notice I didn't say anything about water quality measurements. I said you just put in the numbers and you say go. The red dots are the water quality monitoring results from, I think it's 2002 through 2010 maybe. And in reality, it's actually a pretty good fit. It's not a red dot, blue dot thing. It has to do with when the samples were collected, and that's that would be like mid-ebb, and that would be like mid-tide. So those are different. They shouldn't line up. But it's actually a pretty good fit when you think of the complexity of the system. That's the head of Childs River here. That's why it's so high. This is Eel Pond, all the way down near the inlet. It's relatively low. The average is about 0.35, 0.36. This is the main bay area. That's actually up by, I think, the head of, no, that's the main bay. And this is then come on, Brian. This is the Eel Pond data coming down here, very high at the top and coming down. And all of these trends, and I'll show you a better graph than that, the reason this goes down and up is these are they're not connected by lines for a reason. This is the head of Childs, the middle of the Childs, and then the mouth before it enters into the Sea Pit River. Okay, that's why it goes down like that, and that's what you're seeing in these. This is another suite coming down. Okay, so they go in nitrogen from the head of a system to the mouth. Head is high, mouth is low. Even subtributaries in a basin, head is high towards the mouth or inlet. Even if it's just the outlet to the main bay, it doesn't matter, it drops down. Salinity goes the other way. It's low when you get up by the head, and the salinity gets higher as you get towards the main bay. Yes, sir?
Is there any way you can use the pointer on the computer to do that rather than the...
I know, can you see
because that
this?
won't come up on the TV, and
Yeah, I can do
breaking my neck trying to see that screen instead of this one.
You look at that one.
And use the computer arrow.
I will do that. Of course, I'll end up probably changing something. But. Okay. So the key, whoops, see what I mean? So, but the key point is that they both change in opposite directions, and yet they use the same dispersion coefficients that are measured for salinity and then flipped to nitrogen, or measured for nitrogen and flipped to salinity. We do it both ways. But the critical piece is that salinity is conservative. You generate the one critical missing feature in the system that people have problems with. You can put them in, people do it. There's tables you get, you put them in the model, and whoopee. But the reality is that we actually calculate those dispersion coefficients, and then we hold them constant for say nitrogen or for salinity, whichever. Okay. This is that gradient you can see. Oh, come on, where is it, Tom? There it is. Red is over 1 milligram per liter in the Childs, comes down into the Childs, lower, down to about 0.7 milligrams per liter, very high numbers. In the Falmouth overlay bylaw in, the 80s, 0.7 I think was the highest that you could get with, and that's actually a pretty good number for really terrible conditions. You come down, by the time you get down, just down to where it hits, this is Sea Pit River, the concentrations have dropped. Now these are tidally averaged concentrations. Same thing with Eel, River. This is Eel Pond's looking pretty good. And in fact, with this scale, because it's so steep, because it has to account all the way over a milligram, this all is pretty blue. You see Yahoo Pond's not doing too good, same thing. But one critical piece I want you to see is Hamblin Pond here has a very steep gradient across it. And I'll talk about this in a second. That steep gradient actually is reflected in the benthic animal habitat that's there. It's actually impaired up here in the top half, and it actually gets pretty good towards the lower half, believe it or not. So we actually can match the habitat measured by animals alone to the nitrogen levels. So you can see the quashnet's quite high. Yeah, it actually goes off the screen. It even gets a little higher up at the top, gets over 1 up at the top. Okay, so that's what it looks like average. But the thing is that the tide goes in and the tide goes out. And so what you see is the tide goes in, water quality improves. As the tide goes out, water quality gets worse in the lower reaches. And it is that reason, this tells us a couple things. One, it tells us that you really do have to make sure when you collect your water quality samples. But the other thing it does is it tells you that the quality of the habitat is changing over time, and you have to take into account. What we've chosen to do based on experience is we'll use the tidally average number as the best estimate of what, if you were an eelgrass plant, what you would see on average on a day. We don't use the best condition, that would be silly because that never works. You don't use the worst condition, that doesn't work either because you're overestimating the bad. So what we use is the tidally average number. And you can see the plumes extend out into the main basin pretty far, but you know, there's some other things. If you look at the Sea Pit River right here, you'll see a plume, as the tide goes in, come up this way as it goes out. So it's like a poof going up, not now, but I'll tell you when. Come on.
Brian, is sage line included and it just stays blue, or is it not part of it?
Wait a second. No, I'll tell you. Right there. So we're actually getting a lot of the Childs River water coming back up this way and contributing nitrogen up in here on the flood tide because it comes down. Oop, Tom, I'm not liking your plan. It comes down here and then it gets swept up this way on the flood, and you can see the white puff go back up into the head of the bay. All right, no, it's that it's so steep a gradient, and actually I can see it on my computer. I get more detail on this for some reason than it's showing up there. All the way, but I'll do it here. This is above 0.45 milligrams per liter. That's the line right there. And this is pretty low. This stays pretty low. But part of the reason for that is this is also, you know, knee deep in macroalgae. So, okay. So as part of the build-out analysis, now I'm just showing you the tidally average numbers. These don't move. This is now enhanced, okay, to give you a little bit more. I think there's a couple more bars in here, so you see a little bit of this better than you saw in the last one. But for the most part, the important comparison is between this graph and this graph. The display and the color scheme is the same in both. This is existing, and this is when we dump in 41% more nitrogen with build-out. And what you see is conditions get a lot worse in Hamlin and Yahoo. They get a whole lot worse in Eel River and in Childs River. And also in most importantly, in some ways, in the Sea Pit River and in the head of Wacoit. Okay?
Brian, sage lot, correct? Sorry.
Which one?
The existing load, you have sage lot as being fairly high, it wasn't that?
I don't get that. I saw that just now too, but I'll have to check on that. They may have left that out of this one because it didn't get better. It got worse.
Brian,
Okay, yeah. Quashnet gets worse.
It doesn't look good.
Quashnet's terrible now, and it'll be worse in the future. It should look bad. It dumped 41% more nitrogen in.
You didn't say Washington, you were adding all the
Oh, yeah, I did. I might have said Municus, huh? No, I did, I think. But it is written on the thing. It's one of our critical ones. When we did our first analysis, we did a separate report just for the Quashnet Hamlin, and Yahoo systems with their tidal rivers. So you can pull that up if you're just interested in Quashnet. You get more detail in that report than you get in this one.
Brian? Can you go back?
Do you use,
What about the little,
use your mic, Matt?
what about the little pond on Washburn Island? Is that just the
Little
residual?
pond on Washburn Island. It just doesn't, we don't, it gets a little worse only because of this.
Yeah, it comes out
You get
of,
nitrogen coming in on the flood tide. This will sweep down on the ebb. On the flood, it'll sweep back up in here, and because of the residence time in here, if you had a concrete lined thing, you would still start gathering nitrogen and start generating some benthic flux and stuff. So it's not because there's a big load coming from Washburn Island, it's because you have this long, narrow tributary that's going to start accumulating a little bit higher nitrogen, okay? Because of transformations, deposition, regeneration. All right. So the first thing we do in terms of setting thresholds is we have to assess the current level in the system, and we do that by looking at auction records. We typically look at summertime bottom water auction records because that's where the animals are, and there are very few cases, and I can't really even name one, where the bottom water has a higher oxygen concentration than the surface water. So we're looking at the worst case oxygen in the system. Sometimes in a stratified system, the surface waters can have plenty of oxygen in them and the bottom still has none. But it's on the bottom where most of the benthic animals that are the base of the food chain live. So that's why we look there. We survey the eelgrass over time, and we look at macroalgal distribution and abundance. Then we look at the benthic animal communities as an indicator of habitat quality because they live there. They're sampling the system all the time for you, and there's enough known about the natural history of these things. It's a standard EPA technique now to be able to look at benthic communities and get an assessment of the health or level of impairment of a system. And then we have long-term water quality records as well, of course. All right. Well, we're lucky in Wacoit in that we have a wealth of eelgrass data. This is some data done, it's out of a report. It's by Burdick, Short and Burdick. Fred's up at UNH. And what they did was, in these years, 87, 88, 89, 92, they came down and they surveyed with field surveys. This is an aerial interpretation. They came down, they surveyed, they did aerial interpretation as well, but they surveyed the distribution of eelgrass in the system. And it's not a perfect figure, but the shady areas, well, actually here, the clear areas have none, the shady areas are where the eelgrass distribution, where the eelgrass beds are. And so in 87, assuming that's 87, yeah, it is 87, that we'd already lost eelgrass from much of this bay and had been in the main bay clustering down near the inlet. And you can follow this patch over time. It was big, then it started to break up, sort of changes in size, and then it comes down to this, and that's by 92. And I will tell you that we followed that bed all the way through to its virtual demise in the 2000s. So when we were out there I can't remember what year, it was maybe 2004, 2005, 2000, well, I know we were out there in 2007, there were still little remnants of this bed down right in this area by the inlet. Just little bits, you could still find them. Not anything to write home about, nothing that would show up on an aerial photo. We just bumped into them because we had divers in the water, which is not how you would survey eelgrass. But you also see in this period too, extensive, relatively extensive beds in the east arm of Eel River, in the Eel Pond, much of Great Mill River, Hamlin Pond, and much of Yahoo Pond, except that deep hole, which makes sense because it's deep and it's harder for the light to penetrate. So a lot of eelgrass coverage in here that then even by, well, in their case, 87, 89, 91, 92, 6 years later, that much of that was disappearing. In here, in Hamlin, the rivers had thinned out here, and had gone to the edges. And this is classic nitrogen enrichment eelgrass loss. You lose the eelgrass from the deep water first. So what it looks like is well, geez, it filled the channel, and then all of a sudden it's only fringing, and then the next step is that it goes completely away, but sometimes it doesn't, because if it's in a happy enough, shallow enough spot and undisturbed enough, it might be able to hang on for some period of time. It also disappears typically from the top to the bottom of things, Again, the head up here had eelgrass at one point. There was eelgrass up here. There's none even in 87. So and they concluded, of course, as well, and there is eelgrass in Sagelot Pond in this and in this. They didn't look in here. That's why it's not there. And they concluded, of course, it was nitrogen enrichment as well, again, for the same reason. It's a classic nutrient response pattern. It's like male pattern baldness. This is DEP's data. It's different. It's not the same data. It's a follow-up. That was up to 92, I think. This starts at 95 and goes to 2001. But the yellow is the baseline year that the MEP uses from DEP of his best estimate of historic eelgrass. We see his beds up here, which make total sense. They did capture the beds that were there in the 80s. A little bit, we're thinking these are fringing beds up in Charles. Again, remember, that's 51 to the shallows. Nothing in Quashnet, which was diagnostic to us because when Curley was out there in the 60s, he didn't find any eelgrass there either. Didn't look in Sagelot. And then this is the blow up of these. And the 51 shows pretty much the same pattern of eelgrass in Hamlin and Yehu as did the 87 field verified survey. So we get sort of a continuous eelgrass pattern. It's not perfect, okay, but a pretty good pattern that's consistent from 51 to 87 to 88, and then starts to collapse, and it continued to collapse in 92, 95, 2001. To the point now where there's very little left. In this one in 91, we actually were out there looking at all this, so 91 and in 95 and in 97. And Sagelot Pond still has some eelgrass, and these plots are diminishing further and further and further and further, to the point I'm not sure that now they become sort of ephemeral. They're there one year and not the next. Based on this alone, you would say, geez, this could be a problem. You might not say, well, it is a problem, but you certainly wouldn't say, well, geez, the system's great. So then we also then looked at oxygen levels. Washington River, haha. And these triangles are oxygen moorings that were out there, minimum of 30 days. Frequently it was 45 days or longer. Sagelot Pond one is one that's maintained by Webner, that they provided generously their data for this. And what we have here is, again, these sort of rough transects, but these measure oxygen every 15 minutes. And this is sort of Lower Childs, so it would be, Lower Childs is right there. So there's where it hits into the Seapit River. So it's just up a little bit. It's not way up here. So it should be sort of the better conditions in the Childs. And it's not. I mean, it is the better conditions, but it's still not very good. Now remember, we also have oxygen readings from all of those monitoring grab samples from all of those years. We cross-compare these data to those data.
Ryan, tape. Hold it.
Take 5.
They don't need to hear this. You do that, I'll say this. We cross-compare the mooring data, which is this, to the grab samples that we take. We use those to make sure that these were not anomalous years. And when we have as much data, and we use it, it's presented in the tables, but when we have as much from a system like Quoit as we have, we actually frequently will discover that the oxygen minimum from the grab sampling data is the same or very, very close to the oxygen from the continuous mooring. The only problem we get is when you only have 10 samples ever, then you miss the minimum. Because you can see here that if you really want to know how bad things are, well, geez, here's a period where if you sampled, you would not get these numbers. And so you need enough grab monitoring data to catch those minima. Okay?
Are those the samples at night after?
All of the sampling is mid-tide at like 7 in the morning, plus or minus. And we know that oxygen stays low because what happens is, although the sun comes up and we see the light in the water doesn't get to be enough that the phytoplankton produce enough oxygen to overcome their respiratory needs. So even though the sun comes up, oxygen continues to drop until a little bit after sunrise and then goes up.
Have you seen a correlation between the lower levels of oxygen and then a cloudy day on top of that?
Yeah, we had a,
Or the
we
drop?
finished a, I can't even remember anymore, but it's like a 40 or 30 estuary regional study. We wanted to know what was was there a regional trigger to low oxygen? Meaning West Falmouth Harbor gets low oxygen the same day as Green Pond, the same day as, Muddy Creek in Pleasant Bay. Why is that? And so we tracked that all down that, yeah, there's a strong correlation. People used to think it was rain. There's papers out there saying it's rain. It isn't. There's no evidence that we can find. We have no relationship with rain. But what we have is that rain frequently has low light. And so it's the low light associated with the rain that does it. And that's the trigger. So that's a trigger. But what's a trigger? Well, triggers, the system is set up to go low oxygen. It's set, it's ready to go. It needs something to set it off. And then low light cuts down on the phytoplankton oxygen production, and that's enough to set it off.
And that's when you get fish kills that I
Yep.
noticed. Yeah.
And so you can't predict when a storm's coming or when low light's going to hit. That's
What do we do about that?
all right. And remember, this is from systems all throughout southeastern Mass, facing different size, different tide ranges, different depths, different everything. So we were looking for a general principle in that case, not a site-specific thing. All right. So you look at Charles. The red line is 4 milligrams per liter, which is sort of an acute stressor by EPA now that they set up, meaning that if you hit it, it's really bad. The state water quality standard for Waquoit would be 6. 6 is up here. And so 6 says, thou shalt not ever drop below 6. Well, that happens almost every day in this trace. EPA says thou shalt never drop below 4, and that happens a lot. So there is stress. This is then also used to say, okay, this system is, the only thing that can account for this is organic enrichment. The organic enrichment can come from 3 things. It could be the fresh water carrying stuff down the Charles, but it isn't that because we don't have those types of rivers, and it just isn't that. I can explain why later. But what it also can be is macroalgae on the bottom, accumulations, which we do have some, and it can be the phytoplankton. We have very large phytoplankton blooms in the Charles River. We have some limited macroalgae, and the freshwater rivers do not transport. We measure the carbon content, the particulate carbon coming down the rivers, and there's just so much more being generated in the bay that it would be virtually impossible for the answer to be what's coming out of this tiny little stream that's called the Charles River. Upper Eel River is also up. It's not up very far. It's about halfway up the river, again, for bad. You would expect in these 2 cases that the animal populations would be sort of in bad shape. You also wouldn't expect to see the eelgrass there in any big way, and they're not. We've lost the eelgrass there, so it's consistent with that as well. I'm not going to show them all. We had like I don't know, a dozen or more. Head of Waquoit Bay is not so bad. Oxygen stays relatively high. These are the ones I want to make a point later, and they're all presented in the report. And the main basin of Waquoit, which is lower, it's sort of central of the big part of Waquoit, we do get these drops. Now, what's going on, we think, is when we were looking at all of this, we weren't finding large macroalgal accumulations up here. The water quality and the chlorophyll wasn't all that high. Phytoplankton's not that high down here either. Chlorophyll's not that high. What this is looking like, and other measurements would indicate that it is this, from direct measurements made by others, that this is actually the macroalgae contributing to oxygen problems. And the high oxygen is as indicative of too much plant matter as is the low, because it means the system's out of balance. Oxygen should not really rise in these systems above 10. If it goes above 10, it means that you probably have too much macroalgae or phytoplankton for the system to be in balance. So it's as diagnostic of eutrophication as the low oxygen is. Oh, by the way, that's why you never use averages. All right. All right, and then this is, I put some data in from Webner, which is very good, Sage Lot Pond. Sage Lot Pond also has low oxygen events. So actually, you look at these, and I put these in for a reason. You look at these, you say, well, geez, that looks sort of like the same as the others. But what we've found from studies of salt marsh ponds is they typically have low oxygen conditions. We've studied systems that have loading, which is virtually 100% atmospheric deposition. They still have low oxygen conditions because salt marshes are naturally organic matter and nutrient rich. Been repeating that as a mantra for 40 years now. That is why salt marshes are important. They're naturally organic matter and nutrient rich, which means they're very productive, which means they can serve as fisheries, nursery grounds for coastal fisheries and all of that. But naturally organic matter rich means that they're going to be susceptible to having natural low oxygen events. So we don't see this as, this is stressful to embayment in faunal animals. But the animals that live in a marsh, because they are naturally enriched, are adapted to that environment. And so we still find productive environments in these conditions. Otherwise, we wouldn't probably have the Wetlands Protection Act. Okay, the habitat assessments that we have, we look at benthic communities. These are all the sites that we took, that we looked at, benthic animal communities. As you can see, it covers the bay, covers the eastern embayments. And again, if the eelgrass didn't convince you and the oxygen didn't convince you, then we'll look at this. Normally, we don't want to see, we sort of want to see between 20 and 25 species in a basin, just as a rule of thumb. I mean, we just did an analysis of that as well, and ended up that is also consistent. If you're over 20, 21, 22, then you also don't have organic enrichment species. You typically don't have opportunistic species. You tend to have crustaceans, mollusks or shellfish, deep burrowers, things that are viewed as high quality. So just as a rule here. But what you see is very few of these. Now, this is that the upper part of Hamblin has 4 and 10. The lower part has double or 5 times. So that's what I meant by there's that gradient that now in this case, in terms of the benthic animal communities, that follows the nutrient gradient across Hamlin. But when you see 26 organisms, you don't need to know what they are, because there should be a minimum of 300 to 500 species here. 300 is the lower limit. You got 26. You got 1/10 or less. Same thing with Yehu Pond, the upper part of Yehu Pond, 34, the middle part, 141. These are very low numbers. Then you get down to the Great Little River Confluence, for some reason, has, again, very few species. This could be a physical disturbance issue, we're not sure. But then you get into the Quashnet, the upper and lower basins of Quashnet are hideous. I mean, they have 1 organism present, and there's like, between them, they can average 10. There's nothing there. It is dead in the summer, and that matches the oxygen levels, which also are very hypoxic for long periods of time in the summer. Yep.
When you say physical disturbance, do you mean boats?
Well, it could be boats, but it also could be, it's a very high velocity area because you got all this water coming down from the 2 rivers and they're converging right in this one little spot. And so before I go crazy about that confluence area, I mean, I lit it up, but before I would go crazy about it, I would go back and try to determine why. Remember, our job is to point out the things that we're certain are due to nitrogen, not just where there's a problem. We don't know exactly why there. We don't know why in Great River, for instance, it would be 10 species and why in Little River it would be 19 species, but where they come together it's 4. It just doesn't make any sense. So that's what I mean by that. And then Eel Pond, again, the western side is the side closest to the town of Falmouth. Very poor. The eastern side, much better. As you'd figure, this bounces right up to the Seepit River. The main basin's right next to the inlet, very good. Charles River, not so good. Low oxygen, didn't go to 0, but it's low. These are, in addition to everything else, these are dominated. These, I don't know about that one. This one for sure. These are dominated by stress indicator species. There's high numbers of capitelids in many of these, especially Charles River is dominated by capitelids, which are those small worms, opportunistic species. Opportunistic species are the ones that come in when everybody else is dead. And they're the ones that come in when you disturb an area, like you dredge it, or they come in when you have an oil spill, they come in when you dump sewage sludge in the ocean. Those are the ones that come in. So those are capitelids and tubophysids are ones that EPA has identified, and we have identified as well as ones that are indicative of very poor quality. So it's not just the numbers, it's also who's there. The interesting thing here, Quake Bay South doesn't look too bad, but this is only in areas that we could get through the, they're mainly crustaceans. They're things that are grazing on the macroalgae. They're not really living in the bottom. So the macroalgae, I mean, they're not eosinic. I mean, you pull that stuff up and look at it, you're going to find snails and little amphipods and things grazing on it. But the upper basin here is very interesting in that the northern basin of Wequit was a huge amphipod match, which is a transitional environment. It's not super stressed, but it's not super good. It's what came into Boston Harbor when they stopped the sledge dumping. And it greatly improved. The whole system became a mat of amphipods. So it's sort of transitional, and that's pretty much describes the main upper basin. No macroalgae, low chlorophyll, some low, DO wasn't bad, but it's not great. The conditions are just at the border of not great, and so you get that type of community. The point I'm trying to make here is it all hangs together. The loss of eelgrass, the oxygen and depletion in the different spots. When there's a lot of depletion, you see it in the animals. When there's sort of moderate depletion, you see it in the animals. When there's no depletion, you see it in the animals. And in the report, we have all the chlorophyll data. That all hangs together to indicate two things. One, we've lost a lot of eelgrass, and the pattern is diagnostic of nutrient overloading, nutrient enrichment. We have low oxygen, and the pattern and the extent is mainly in this region, always due to nutrient enrichment eutrophication. And the animals match the oxygen, organic matter loading, and also the nutrient distribution. So all of them form a consistent pattern to the point where you can start pulling off the TNs and looking and predicting ahead what not how many animals are going to be there, but is it going to be good, bad, or indifferent.
Brian, before you leave this slide, it's interesting that Sea Pit River is so good.
Yep.
Has the highest number of actual species and a very large number of individuals.
And very high diversity.
Yeah.
And evenness. And the water quality in the Sea Pit has just been fantastic. I mean, you can see the bottom from the boat, and it has to do with the flushing rate through it. It looks like on the ebb tide, the water blows right through from the sound all the way up, and you're getting virtual sound water in Eel Pond Basin, which also has a high number of species, you see.
Right, yeah.
And all the way up the Sea Pit River, and the return flow doesn't seem to come back just exactly back. It sort of mixes in
a different way.
That's also a traditional shellfish.
Yeah, I know, I was waiting for that.
Well, yeah, and cause and effect.
I'm not going to say there is, but I'd like to think there is, but then again, I'm already on record as having that feeling. I think that there's a possibility. I mean, there's such a dense shellfish population there that are filtering that you don't know if that's also helping to clean the water, but you don't necessarily have to have that to explain this, but it wouldn't hurt.
Right, and the other thing I want to tie back is that you've identified the sub-watersheds, that they're either bad or good, and ultimately when we start talking about solutions, I think that this particular spreadsheet is useful.
Yeah. I mean, what we're really, tonight I'm just trying to get people, not you people so much, but everybody sort of on the page that there can be no argument that this system is impaired. Right. There can be no argument anymore that this system is impaired by nitrogen enrichment. It's just too clear, it's too diagnostic, and too many scientists have concluded the same thing with different data sets. And so that means we get into that slide that says, okay, what are you going to do to manage it? All right, you're going to either manage the source or the flushing. All right, I'm just going to run through these summary tables. I'm not going to go through them, just the red thing. Just to get, the tables are in there with explanations, everything's footnoted, but the critical thing is if there's eelgrass and it's completely lost, and it's not even ephemeral, then it becomes significantly impaired by definition, and that's this row here for eelgrass. And you can see that based on the 51 data anyway, Wequit Bay had eelgrass at the north. Certainly in the 87 data, it had eelgrass at the south. There's no record of it in the west branch of Eel River, Eel Pond, but there was in the east and Pond Basin. So it's gone. So it's a significantly impaired. Same thing with Charles, and Sage Lot Pond still has eelgrass. Sage Lot Pond has this sort of moderately impaired because the eelgrass that is there may or may not be shrinking a little bit, but most importantly, it's heavily epiphytized. There's lots of plants and little animals growing on it, which cut down the light, and it's a sign of stress typically. So it's not that nice, lush green stuff. So it's not really bad, and in fact, it doesn't really matter because we're not targeting Sage Lot. I should just say that. We're not targeting Sage Lot Pond. Just because something's on here doesn't mean we're targeting. The reason is, if you improve the water quality in the main bay of Wacoit, which is one of the things that we are targeting, and that's the water that feeds into Sage Lot. So Sage Lot will improve because the water going into it in the future will be better than it is now. So therefore, Sage Lot Pond will improve. And that's a lot of restoration. It's picking, you don't have to pick every site, pick the sites that drive all the other sites.
Brian, excuse me, I was just wondering, in the water quality assessments you've done in the south of Wacoit Bay, it looks pretty good. Basically.
Yeah, the water quality, it's not great, but it's not horrible. It is over, chlorophyll's over 5, it's like 7 or something like that, but there's a steep gradient. It goes up to nearly 10, and then it goes up even higher when you get higher in the bay.
Right.
TN's not very high, but it has all that macroalgae in there.
So, right, but the question then is, why is the eelgrass beds shrinking so much down there? If it's just due to nitrogen loading and other things, it seems that, could it be other factors like
Yeah, the
shellfish raking?
macroalgae can have a direct effect on the loss of eelgrass.
So there's a lot of macroalgae in that. The water quality is pretty good, but
There's more than 50 centimeters thick of macroalgae in the bottom of that bay in the summer. And when we were out in one of our surveys, a poor diver, we put him in the water and said, here, take this quart, it's this big, go get me a quart. He blew 2 tanks of gas and swam the entire lower basin, and he couldn't hardly find one patch that big. It's just full. Now, it doesn't grow there. Remember, it's drift algae, so as the water moves, it'll tend to distribute it evenly across the bottom. And of course, we could have gone right to the edges, but that's cheating. We don't do that. Okay, so that's a significant part of the problem, and it's been there for a while. And in Quashnet, like I said, it's 50 years.
No, Brian, just to confirm your theory, is the reason eelgrass is surviving in Sage Lot Pond is because it's so shallow?
Well,
And
it's not,
it's got access to light?
not super shallow, but it is shallower, but it's not as shallow as parts of Upper Hamlin or parts of Yehu or parts of Little River where it hits Hamlin or Yehu.
Well, even Hamlin, where you still have residual. I was surprised to see that
Yeah,
there's
a patch here and
residual
there, you can
eelgrass
sort of
there.
find it. But it tends to be ephemeral. It used to be consistently patches in certain places. We'd go and look. And then one year they were gone, and then the next year they were back.
But that's mainly because it's shallow and
It's shallow, and also I
the
think
light
that
gets to it.
I think it also may have something to do with the dynamics of that it's surrounded by wetlands, which may filter out some of the particulates as well.
I'd just point out, too, that there is not a lot of land development in its watershed.
No, there's
It's
not.
a fairly small watershed and not much in
And
it.
anything that really would be sort of filtered out by, if it came in by the wetlands, I think. And like I said, I mean, it still has eelgrass, so it only takes a little tiny improvement there to bring that back to really good. So that's another reason we're not worried about. Okay, this is the old stuff we did. This is from the first report, and we see the same. I mean, the Quashnet River's in horrible shape. All right, it's heavily nitrogen enriched. It's been nitrogen enriched more for longer than any other part of this system. It has a very big watershed is part of the reason. And if you look at Quashnet, I mean, it's like, I mean, the best you get is that it's significantly impaired. The reason it's significantly impaired because the oxygen didn't stay at 0. It drops to 2. But for chlorophyll, Upper Quashnet had chlorophylls over 100 micrograms per liter when people start worrying about impairment when it goes over 5. Okay, so that's 20 times what people, it was actually went up to 120, 130, something like that. So it's heavily nutrient enriched. Part of it may have to do with flushing, may not. but in any case, it is. Hamlin Pond, when we did this analysis, is 2005. Hamlin Pond was sort of okay, still had some eelgrass in it. The infaunal animals in the lower part of Hamlin were pretty good. In the upper part, they were more impaired, so it can't be given a high quality reading. It did have some high elevated chlorophyll, up over 10, 15, and didn't have any macroalgae. Little River didn't have any macroalgae. Yehu Pond and Great River didn't have macroalgae. It's probably the reason why the infauna communities are as good as they are in those systems. They're not being smothered, and the chlorophyll wasn't arbol in most of them. Yehu did have, it's more isolated basin, and it did have some blooms that bring it down to significant impairment. The infauna, significant impairment in Yehu is in that large part of the basin, is that deep basin which goes very low oxygen. I didn't show you the data, but it's in the report. I mean, but if you think about what I just said, all that blather that I just went through, it's the terminal basin. It's these isolated upper here in upper Eel River, it's Childs River, Quashnet River, Hamlin, Yehu. That's where we're worried about the big impairments. The main basin's impaired, but the upper part is, and it's the lower part because there's macroalgal accumulation. So we have all these little tributaries. If you go to other systems on the Cape and you look, you will find the exact same phenomenon. It is these small tributary basins that typically get hit the worst, because that's where the nitrogen coming from the land through groundwater or streamwater is focused. If you think about it, all that water coming down the Quashnet River goes into the Quashnet River, and a little bit then of additional groundwater next to the river. All that water coming down the Childs River goes to the Childs River, and with a little bit of groundwater as it moves down along. Same thing, Eel River doesn't have a stream really to speak of any big size, but the groundwater tends to always be focused at the head of the system, and that's why they tend to be so enriched. Plus, the heads of these little tribs are the farthest from the tidal inlet, which carries into the system the high quality water. So they're farthest from the good water quality source, and they have the poorest flushing, and they get the most nitrogen load per square foot. And then, of course, what goes into Quashnet ends up in the main bay. What goes into Childs goes into Eel Pond, things like that. So what we see, though, is the restoration goals are to try to bring back eelgrass habitat in really the lower bay, lower Eel Pond, which would be Eel Pond, not Eel River. Restore a little bit Sagelop Pond, Hamlin, and definitely Hamlin and Yehu ponds. Those are the areas that we have very highly documented historical changes in eelgrass. And so that's what we're targeting for eelgrass. But we also have these benthic animal habitat problems where we have no history of eelgrass, like in Quashnet, but we have to worry then about benthic animals. You're not allowed to write it off because it didn't have eelgrass. You then have to step down to the next thing, which is the benthic animal species. The nice thing is benthic animals are more tolerant to nitrogen loading than is eelgrass. Well, and these are all the targets. If you look in Quashnet, illustrate the point, set a threshold of 0.5, that's for this region. Most of the thresholds that were found for the 59 embayments we've done have ranged between 0.45 and 0.55, but almost all of them are 0.5. We just completed analysis of 611 sites, and it came out that if you want to hit that 20 to 25 number, then 0.5 is the number that you use. So we have an independent analysis cross estuaries that indicates that as well. But also, if you just look within Wuquoit, you'll find the high-quality sites are right about there. For the rest, the threshold selected is actually the same as for Popponesset. It's based on both intersystem comparison, but it's also based on Wuquoit. If you look at Wuquoit, you go down to this region here, when there was a bed down in this region. The bed was existing at an average TN or tidally average TN of around 0.385. Or 0.395, and it was disappearing. It was slowly going away. It was persisting. It persisted all the way through the 80s and the 90s into the 2000s, and it was just hanging on, but it was slowly dwindling at that level. And so that means that level is slightly over the threshold. If it was under the threshold, it wouldn't be going away. But it's over the threshold, so that's going away. So that's that, and then we have other presentations in Chapter 8 and Chapter 7 that go into the more details, but the reality is that this number's held up pretty well. We have evidence from in here where there is eelgrass, and also in Yehu and Hamlin, where there was a little eelgrass, and there was a little eelgrass in here, that for some reason in Hamlin, we were finding it at these levels. In Yehu Pond, we were still finding eelgrass in this system when we were measuring, because we started way before it disappeared at this weird concentration, which we tried to stretch it as far as we could for you guys, because every tenth, every hundredth in a threshold is more nitrogen removal and more nitrogen removal and more nitrogen removal. And we could justify that based on Yehu Pond specific site measurements. Warren's Pond is 0.45, so it's not like this is weird. It has to do with how shallow it is, Virginia, you know, and so it is the depth, and it is the flushing, and it is what measurements you have from the site when it's there. And we still had it there, so we could do those analyses. Okay, well, as you can see, these levels are considerably higher, all of them, than these levels. Eel River here is 0.5 because, again, there was no eelgrass up in here documented. So that's the benthic animals. Oops. What are you doing to me here? That's the 0.5 is the benthic animals, 0.38 is the eelgrass. Okay? These are the target sites we have to try to achieve these levels. That's what these dots are. This one goes to that dot. This is Charles River, and on and on and on. And the reason is, I said, Hamlin Pond, Yehu Pond are isolated enough water bodies that we can't just put something here, put a target here and expect these to make it, or put a target here and expect that to make it, okay? Or that to make it. These are isolated enough the way the circulation goes that you really have to track each one of these. But the good news is you can actually restore Hamlin and Yehu without restoring Quashnet, say. You can't restore, well, yeah, and you could probably restore Eel River without restoring Charles River. I mean, those type, they're isolated enough. They're still connected, but they're isolated enough you might be able to do that. Well, one of the things we do is we have to see if you can actually make it. Now, what we do, and you're all familiar with this, what we do is we go in and we start sequentially removing nitrogen load from the watersheds until the levels at each one of those stations that are now above the threshold for that station hit the threshold for that station. And it's kind of funny because, as you saw, if you remove nitrogen from the Charles River, that actually affects the head of the main bay, because the way nitrogen comes out of the Charles River and up into the main bay. So it gets a little tricky to optimize. This is not optimized. This is, let's spread the pain around and take it out of a whole bunch of sub-embayments, plus what the town of Mashpee at the time was proposing to do, although that's now changed a bit because new scenario runs. And it's a relatively large amount of load. It says that we're getting about twice as much nitrogen in from the watershed as the system can tolerate. But remember that the watershed only accounts for about 80% of the total load to the bay, too. I mean, the atmosphere accounts for 21%. But we only are dealing with that controllable load. We're not dealing with natural surfaces and all that when I do the 53%, okay? And if you want to do it all by septic load reduction, you know, shoot it to the moon, take a sewer, shoot it at the moon, then it's a real lot, 76% of that. So big numbers. But the system is super impaired. And any one of those, Charles River, certainly Quashnet River would rank up in some of the most impaired smaller estuaries if that was an independent system around. So that's why it's so much. This system went over its nitrogen threshold more than 50 years ago, okay? So it's a long way. It's not Quistit Harbor. It's not Wild Harbor, unfortunately. It's not those. It's that maybe just slightly over. This is way over. Big numbers.
Brian, can I ask you?
Yes.
About,
Could you use the mic? We have a mic up here, if somebody could pass it back, or if you want to get up. Jane.
a question from Jane
Give
Abbott.
us your name, too, for the
A
world to know.
question from Jane Abbott, who lives over
Thanks.
Hoyt Bay. Does the flushing of the Quashnet River have anything to do with its high nitrogen content? It has almost no exit into the bay.
I know. At the point when we were doing this analysis, we put tide gauges in the lower basin. I checked just for you, Mark, today. We put tide gauge in the lower basin, below the bridge, but above the inlet. And we obviously had them in the main bay. I didn't go out to the ocean, just in the main bay. And there was not any significant attenuation of the tide at that point, which surprised me, between the main bay and that basin. There's two reasons for that. One is that there's a huge delta that's formed there, but as long as the water can pass over that without, if it's wide enough, then you don't get an occlusion. If it's that way today, I don't know. And that would be one thing that you would go out and recheck, just to make sure today, is it that way? But at the time these things were done, it was not occluded as much as I thought it was, and got scolded by my hydrodynamic modeler this afternoon. So, and I checked the tide gauge records. They fall right on top of each other, so it's not occluded.
Because it's an ACEC, it can't be dredged.
It's what?
An ACEC.
Oh, I thought you said
Area.
Because it's easy, it can't be dredged.
It's an area of critical environmental concern, dated back to 79.
Yeah, I know. One would say that you don't want my opinion on that. I would say that if you could restore an entire estuary, half of an estuary, by taking out some of the sand that has come in, that might be something you might look into relative to the state. But you can dredge an ACEC. Rock Harbor's, or is that outside? Is the dredge site in Rock Harbor outside? Didn't they move the ACAC line? Yeah. I think there was a little, do you remember, Ed? Yeah, I think the line kind of dips into the estuary. They can dredge the inlet. Anyway, but those are the problems we grapple with. It is sand mainly. Okay. You guys already know this, but in this implementation design phase, the town's been using the model to look at management options, but I think for Wacoit, we're just sort of partway into that at this point. I should say, though, that the town, Mashpee's run 9, is that right, Ed? 9 scenarios now in that region, plus the ones that are in the report for our standard scenarios, to try to refine down what the town wants to do in the eastern side. Okay, what they can do. I mean, they can't like start digging up Falmouth Road, so the Mashpee side. And we haven't done, just because you've just gotten the report, not because you haven't done anything, but because you're just getting the report, you couldn't run any scenarios till you had it. But they got this earlier breakout. All right, the options, they're hydrodynamic options, and like Jane, I tend to agree that one of the things to look at, though, is to see if that's occluded, just so you know. It's always good to know things. And then see what you can do. But none of the other, I looked at all the other tide gauges, I could not find any significant. Now, what's significant mean? A couple of percent is significant. A drop in tide, where the tide coming in from Vineyard Sound to Nantucket Sound is big, and it can't top out because there's a blockage in Childs River or any of those that we're not finding. It's flushing fine, unfortunately. Natural attenuation options. There is one potentially in the Quashnet River, right? Maybe, maybe not. But there's others as well relative to some of the streams and ponds, but not too much still. I mean, most of Wacoit's been open spaced, and it's actually in pretty good shape. What we always look for, though, is man-made ponds or ponds that have been altered, that then can be restored to natural function in a manner that restores them to natural function, but also helps their nitrogen removal capacity, because they naturally remove nitrogen. Every time I say that, somebody says, oh, you're going to engineer the ponds for nitrogen. No, if you just put them back the way they should be, they do it on their own. Shumet Pond removes half of the nitrogen that it passes through it. Nobody's doing anything to make it do that. It just does that. That's what they do. Many of the ponds on the Cape remove between, usually about 50%, some a little lower, some higher, but 50% is about what we find on average. Source reductions, towns are already thinking about, or at least talking about, fertilizer education and bylaws and such. That's fine. I did look at the Falmouth bylaw and what it would achieve relative to the loading from fertilizers that we have in the MEP, which would be actual existing loading. And it actually would hold the line or even slightly reduce it. So it actually would be a benefit. You would get some benefit out of that. The Nantucket bylaw, as it was drafted and given to me, would not. If they actually implemented that on Nantucket, it would increase their load about threefold. So you've actually designed your bylaw in the right way. And then wastewater options, we all know. I mean, we're up to our eyeballs in trying to deal with these. With what type of wastewater. There's a million different ways to cut that one. That, you know, everybody, we know that. And then there's, what I don't have here, but it goes under natural attenuation, we have in estuary options as well. In Wacoit, there's been experimental work on using some macroalgal uptake of nitrogen. It's a little harder in some ways. We have looked at, in other systems, harvesting, but you know, macroalgae, but that's a problem because you get bycatch, and it's very difficult. You get all the little things that are floating around, and it's a problem, and so it's not really functional in this region yet. And of course, then there's aquaculture. And Wampanoag tribe and Rick York, who's the shellfish constable, you've done that. In Mashpee, have been working on aquaculture in Pompanesett Bay, and their sites in Wacoit as well. So those are things that have potential value, as well as in estuary options. And the town of Falmouth knows this because you're already up to your eyeballs relative to getting pilots off in Little Pond, for instance. So those may have that. It's another system where you might get value out of that pilot experiment.
So Brian, you have any examples of harvesting macroalgae?
No, we looked at it in 3 bays, and we just ran into about 50 rock walls in terms of trying to get it permitted, and the arguments that the regulatory agencies are making actually sort of made sense. So it became very hard to continue pushing against them.
And that was that you're dragging out a lot of animals.
Yeah, you're
with
taking
it?
out a lot of animals. You maybe take out larvae. You know, there's lots of things that you're disturbing, not just the macroalgae. This is just regular, natural set macroalgae, not that you're growing it, but it's there, and you say, I don't want it there, I go collect it. There's other problems with it in that you break it up. If you have, a lot of this is ulva, some of it's cladophora, the famous cladophora in Wacoit, and the problem with some of the harvesting things, they break it up into little chips, and then those little chips go back in the water, and they all grow new plants. And so you run into problems that way too. But you do get the nitrogen you took out, but the problem doesn't go away. This is where we find ourselves. We find ourselves over then in the next step after the TMDL is these management scenarios. You have to continue monitoring these systems, because what happens is that the implementation process is taking so long that what will happen is the big fear is that something will change in the system. Wacoit's another poster child for something happening. Pleasant Bay is the classic poster child for new inlet, blah, everything changes. But Wacoit, it already happened. Wacoit came in my world first. Wacoit in the 38 and then 44, I think, but certainly the 38 hurricane, the tide range of the system, the inlets changed, the tide range changed, and all of the salt marshes in Wacoit went from being dominated by Spartina patens, high marsh, to being more associated with the estuary, low marsh, Spartina alterniflora. Wholesale change. It all happened in a few years. And it all happened because of a storm, and those storms come again. Catena, same thing. That's something that nobody noticed at the time, but it did happen. And we continue to get things happening, and we want to make sure that nothing is changing in this system that would alter your plans. And so what we've done now, like in this system, now we're on a lower energy effort maintenance sort of monitoring, such as we have like in Little Pond, say. Okay. And then the reality is that it really doesn't take a long time to start seeing good things happen. If you think of it, nitrogen goes in and you're worried about phytoplankton blooms, but you know, phytoplankton don't live very long. week, 2 weeks, so you can get rapid changes if you start starving them of nutrients. Animals, populations recover relatively quickly. They won't recover to pristine, but they will start to improve very quickly, as we've seen and documented in Boston Harbor within a year or two, 3. The problem is that to implement this is a lot of planning, outreach, funding, and that's really, as we all know, the current holdup right now.
Brian, how long does it take for the macroalgae to disappear?
If you can starve them, I would say actually relatively quickly, except for one thing. It will equate the main basin, just that lower basin, not in Quashnet, not in any of the other, that lower basin. It's going to take a lot longer than I would think it would, because right now they've gotten in there, all the propagules are there, and they reoccur, and the nitrogen concentrations are not super high in the lower basin. Now, what we haven't done is determine if the macroalgae is coming in. It's moving. But we just completed a huge study of multiple estuaries, actually in Falmouth, looking at macroalgae, and does it grow in place, or does it drift in? And the answer is at least grows in place. So that would mean that this is probably growing in place, and I just have no idea at this point, 10 years maybe. Remember, you got a 50-centimeter pile, but I don't know. That's a guess.
What if you dragged it all out into the sound?
If you could do that, then you'd be then fine. But you can't do that. So the question is, what you're waiting is for natural source processes to wind it down. You have to get rid of the nitrogen in the sediments. That's about a 3 to 5 year process. But it ramps down. It doesn't go like this, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years. It goes the first year you lose a lot, and then less, then less, then less, and then after 3 to 5 years it's back to some new baseline. Because a lot of that macroalgae, we think, is getting its nitrogen out of the sediment. And then it dies and it goes back into the sediment, and then it comes back up, and you're not getting a big loop going on. Okay. All right, well, why do we think we can do this, at least in our southeastern Massachusetts estuaries? I mean, we have the Chesapeake Bay. Everybody always brings up the Chesapeake Bay. The first time I heard it was we spent $1 billion in the Chesapeake and nothing's improved. Now I think it's spent $3 billion in the Chesapeake and nothing's going to improve. The point is the Chesapeake Bay, more than half of the load is from agriculture. They have a lot of wastewater treatment plants, and the system is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times bigger than our systems. It has 8 states involved. It has an airshed that is even bigger. It's too big. It's heavily loaded, and it's very difficult to control agricultural loads. Not that way. What we have is 2 towns mainly are in control of Wacoita. It's not true. There's other towns that contribute in the watershed, but fundamentally Mashpee and Falmouth, if they chose to just say, the heck with everybody else, we're going to do this, we're going to work together, get this done, could do it. Whereas in the Chesapeake, that you need whole states to get together, and that's just not multiple states to get together to do it. So it really comes down to the size of the estuary, the magnitude of the problem, and the fact that most of the loads are controllable. They're in local control and state control. So they're not agriculture, which is usually exempt from things. It is septic systems, it is lawn fertilizers, it is impermeable surface runoff. Things that can be controlled and managed with this at the local level and the state level. So that's part of the TMDL process. But that's why I think, and beginning to see movement in certain areas that would indicate that this is pushing us way ahead of the Baltic Sea and these other places. That's it.
Brian, one question.
Please use the mic.
And I should say that Ed Eichner is here, who's the land use lead, and he's here to answer any questions. Most of the people have questions about source identification. Yes, Mr. Bates.
Yeah, Ken Bates. Based on the interaction you showed in your presentation between the 2 communities, it appears to me that one community could not do it by themselves. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, if you wanted to, I mean, we've done this analysis for Mashpee where we've removed virtually everything, right? I mean, Jeff, I mean, it's not everything now, but it's like everything. And they can't get all of those 3 eastern systems back to full restoration because they're still being fed with nitrogen from the main bay, which is coming out of other parts of the system. But they can get really close. And so what it really means is that the 2 communities can get there, but it doesn't look like that one community can necessarily do it on their own. We could see huge improvements, but we wouldn't get to full restoration. So it's going to take multiple communities. Pompanesett Bay, you have 3 communities, right, pretty much, but it's still mainly Mashpee, right?
Papaneset Bay, sure, is 75% Mashpee's load,
And then you look at
Barnstable and
all of
Sandwich.
the other estuaries in Falmouth, except for Kansas, Squetig, and you guys pretty much control the universe on those.
The one that, other than the main body of Oquate Bay, that we're most concerned about working with Falmouth on is Hamlin Pond, since that's the one of the smaller estuaries that we share, and, well, to a certain extent, obviously, Quashnet, Unicus River. I guess we're the load, and you guys are the victims, so we'll have to talk about that as well.
But, you know, the upside for Hamlin and Yehu
That one sounds almost hopeless, the way you said, well, you could fix these others, but you don't touch
Well,
it.
yeah, it's
I
not
guess there has to
hopeless,
be a
but
triage
it's also
effort.
it's a heavily altered system, too. You know, it's been heavily man-altered, and so therefore it has other problems, not just what's coming in now, but the fact there were bogs, the fact that there was stuff in the bay, the ponds, the dam ponds, the undammed ponds, all that stuff. There's a lot going on in the Quashnet that needs to be dealt with, not just looking at nitrogen and concentration. The nice thing about Hamlin and Yehu, which are sort of premier resources in the town of Mashpee, are that you get, even on your own, you can get really, really, really close to full restoration. And I think those were at build-out, right? So that's at build-out, which means if you implemented, you would get restoration now, and then it would only be towards the end of build-out where they'd start to tank again. Yes, sir.
Is this on? I guess. I'm Rick York, Mashpee Shellfish Constable. Going back to Matt Patrick's question about the macroalgae, the seaweed bed in the middle of Oquate Bay, and that is growing in place. It's staying there except for that one odd year where it happened to have conditions where it floated to the top. It was making so much oxygen that it floated itself to the top, but normally it just sits down there, as Brian just said. But it's different. It's an unusual seaweed bed. In the 20 years that I've been here, and also growing up on Cape Cod, you normally get red stringy seaweeds such as Gracilaria and a bunch of mixed algae. That is just almost one species of Cladophora green algae, and it's been down there stable for at least 20 years, and it doesn't tend to go through seasonality. It just grows. It actually grows in the winter under ice until the snow covers it. So it's very stable, it's very thick, and it doesn't move around with storms, or it's just deep enough that it doesn't do that. And the reason that I'm bringing it up is that if you're suggesting that we should remove it, drag it out of there, harvest it, whatever, you should be aware that that seaweed is actually the biggest cleanup of the entire system, because it's pulling out so much nitrogen. If you just take the numbers in the report, and I convert the numbers from kilograms per day to tons of nitrogen a year because I'm looking at the shellfish option, but Oquate Bay, the whole system has about 40 tons total load from the watershed, and that seaweed bed in the middle of the bay is taking out 25 tons. If that bed wasn't there, you would, I don't know if you'd even be able to clean it up, or you certainly wouldn't be able to afford to.
Matt's question and point, I think, was in the context of how long does it take to clean it up. So first thing you do is turn the spigot off.
Right.
And then you worry about
After you shut off the nitrogen.
Right, but
How do you get
in
rid
which
of that?
case then that you've disrupted the system in a positive way, so that then you might be able to
But that's
get rid of that.
good, well taken. I mean, I didn't realize that.
Have it float to the surface and then get rid of it.
well, I just can't, in my opinion, I don't think we should touch it, because at this point in time, without having removed the sources, we would be shooting ourselves in the foot, because we'd have 25 tons more.
There'd be no sense to do it until you shut the sources off.
Right.
The way things are going, that's somebody else's problem.
Well, we're trying to clean it up now. That's the
I
idea.
know, but until the sources go off, until the groundwater plumes are depurated, become washed through, and not completely, but just significantly, and you've lowered the load to the estuary, it's difficult to start. This is like a second step issue. The aquaculture is an immediate issue. You can do that anytime you want. It doesn't, you get a higher percentage reduction if you've shut the other sources off, but at this point you could start that right away.
So on the seaweed topic, from what you were saying, it sounds like we preferred aquaculture of seaweed, not harvest of natural seaweed. Or at least there's problems with large-scale harvest.
I consider at this point, as I'm hoping that my colleagues do, that aquaculture of seaweed right now is still a research exercise. I mean, we've been growing oysters for a long time, and yet we're looking at that as a research topic. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking that the seaweed part is still a research. We can do it. I mean, you can grow it, but the question is that can you get enough? Can you dispose of it? I mean, I know they want to sell it, but
Yeah, it's the market that's the problem.
So I think it's interesting, and I think that right now we're in the world of that we need as many interesting things to try to diversify our options. It used to be, we started this years ago, Tom, when we were here like in 98 or 2000 or whatever we were talking about, is sort of one solution. Now it's like maybe cobbling together 5 or 6 solutions into one big package for a system to cut the cost.
Yeah. I just had one other comment on the report, and that is in the Jehu Pond, Hamlin Pond, Great River, Little River area, the benthic flux. Once again, converting this into tons per year, the watershed septic or wastewater load to that area is about 10 tons a year, and the benthic flux, in that case, since it's mostly just bare muck and it's generating nitrogen, it's the cumulative impact of the decades now being a big source, and in those areas, as you said, it's coming out of the mud, and so we have about a 10-ton per year load from the watershed from wastewater, but the benthic flux in that area is 15 tons.
Yeah.
So
it's the same as I said for the macroalgae. You have the macroalgae there. They die, they contribute nitrogen and organic matter back into the sediments, and it's regenerated, and the new macroalgae take that up, and they recycle it many times, and sort of not a closed loop because some gets out, but in a relatively tight loop. It's hard, if you think about it, how are you going to get nitrogen from the mud out through half a meter of plant matter that wants that nitrogen, and you expect that to diffuse up through and not be taken up? No, uptake is seconds, not. So the same thing with Hamlin and Jehu, except we don't have the macroalgae. What we have is it comes out of the sediment, goes into the water column, but these systems are these little tiny rivers with a big basin. And so we're getting is a lot more coupling of the water column and the sediment in those, and so you're getting that back in. It's all recycled. And so what you do is if you can cut off the load coming in, then that starts slowing down the storage battery of the sediments, and they lower their load, and so they lower together. And that's, it's again, it's the same concept as the macroalgae in the main bay of recycling. You can't get out, but it's just a different process. One's macroalgae, one's phytoplankton.
So if we reduce the whole 10-ton septic load or wastewater load, would the sediment eventually go down to acceptable levels for the whole system to be restored? Or
if you lower what goes in, then the sediment load equilibrates to the new load. It will never go to zero. I mean, like if you have a positive, 15 tons, it'll never go to zero because you still have some nitrogen coming in from the sound. There'll always be nitrogen in the water moving around. It's just that right now, the dominant high-quality nitrogen, if you want to think of that, is the watershed nitrogen. What comes in from the sound, a lot of it doesn't really interact, and what comes in from the watershed, 100% of it interacts.
So at some point in time, if you reduce the watershed load, the benthic load in that system would be low enough for restoration.
Yeah, and we've done that experiment. We followed up on the New Bedford outfall when they changed their the way that they discharge, and then we followed up on the Wareham wastewater treatment plant. When they upgraded, we were able to track the change in the sediments to mirror the change in the load coming in to the head of the estuary.
Thanks.
Brian, that raises a question for me. You just delivered, the report on the 3 options we were looking at for...
Yeah, scenarios, yeah.
Yeah, and, well, those, whatever. And we were not able, and this includes taking all the wastewater from the Falmouth side and sending it somewhere else. You were included in this.
Tell us where.
Not from the whole bay.
As an exercise, there were 3 options. One of was you guys take care of your stuff and get it out of the watershed. The other one was you send it to us and we take care of it. There was some kind of cooperative effort. I don't know, 2 of them were that. In any case, because we were testing 2 different things at the same time, so we needed 3 alternatives. But in any case, when you ran your model on that for build-out, how does this reduction of the benthic flux component, the load, come into that? I mean, is that like just the day you hit build-out and we stop the water coming in, but you still get the benthic load? Or is there a way that you run a time series and you
when you're
eventually...
lowering the load, you're lowering the new nitrogen coming in, which is mainly comes in instantly fertilizable fashion. It's coming as an ammonia and nitrate. It's not coming in as dissolved organic nitrogen, which comes in from the ocean. It's not coming in as particulates. It's coming in mainly as nitrate through groundwater, some ammonia. So it gets in, and we can see it even in the most eutrophic systems that almost immediately that's taken up. I mean, you go to Green Pond, where there's a stream coming in the top, has very high nitrogen in it, and you can't hardly detect the nitrate right almost just a little tiny little stone's throw from where the stream discharges all this nitrate in. You can't see it because it's all been taken up by phytoplankton already, okay? So that phytoplankton then is what contributes to the sediments. And what we do is as we're lowering the nitrogen load, then we say, okay, we can come up with what the particulate concentration coming in from the ocean is and the particulate concentration that would be generated. We can say, well, we're not going to lower the particulate concentration of Vineyard Sound. We might. I mean, if everybody does this, it might, but we're not doing that. So that'll be our safety factor. So what we do is we then say, okay, we can't lower that, but we can lower the new phytoplankton based on the reduction in nitrogen. That's what we do, and then that changes the deposition. And then that changes the flux. That's how it works. So we actually take into account the change in the nitrate tons per year that enter as it affects what goes into the sediments, and what goes in the sediment affects what comes out of the sediments.
Right, but if we've got 15 tons, as Rick is saying, coming out of the sediments...
But remember, it goes into the sediments. More than 15 tons goes into the sediments.
Well, apparently 10 goes into the sediments in that. Just
Do you really want to?
Yeah, I mean, just using Rick's numbers, but say we get rid of all of the load coming in from the watershed that we can, and when you gave us a report, was that a report about what happens that day, and we've still got the benthic flux adding
No. We
to the water column?
We run it to equilibrium.
Was it 5 years later when
Yeah, it's 5 years later. Or
so that was the best we,
Make up
in other
a
words, that
number.
was the best we could do.
It would be what it would be when the system comes back into equilibrium with a new load.
Because we didn't meet the targets for either of those water bodies.
Oh, but you came so close.
After all of that.
Come on, I actually, helped write those, and I know that some of them made it, and some of them, Jeff, were so absolutely close that.
There, in that,
And
each of
you
the
are-
scenarios have, on those water bodies, Jeff Gregg from GHD.
There you go.
Have some, depending on the recharge location, some nitrogen going back into that system, depending on where we pick the recharge locations. I can't say that, I mean, we may have shown quote-unquote sewering or dealing with that 100% in those areas, but there's still that recharge load that's coming back through. So it's not,
Well,
it
for
all
those,
goes magically over.
for those
into-
two small watersheds, the Jehu and the Hamlin Pond, we didn't have any recharge going back into those.
But the
We still
flow
would meet the
coming,
target.
the way when you, I don't want to get into the details of all of this, but when you look at the rainbow spreadsheets and you work through that and use that model to kind of build the basis, that's how I kind of checked to see how close we would get, thinking that I would get pretty close, and then give that information to MEP so that they can run it through and actually do the analysis. When you plug those values in and pull out the nitrogen and then plop it in, like say the Keeter property, or you plug it in to the Johns Pond watershed or somewhere up higher up and things like that, you have to account for where all that nitrogen goes. And in at least one of the scenarios where we use the Keeter property as a potential recharge location, I had to make an assumption that some of that nitrogen went over towards Papaneset Bay and some of it went to Oquay. Now, from standing right here, I can't tell you exactly which one of the sub-embayments it went through, but there is that potential for that.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying.
That was the one that had the
everyone
worst
talks about
results, yeah.
100% removal, it's, I mean, we
Yeah.
maxed it out, and one of the things that I noticed today as I was going through and drafting the alternative report, from when we ran the scenarios the first time, we actually hit all those targets. When we ran the first 5 scenarios, all the ones that we did, plus the ones that were the 3R, the Nitrex modified, all hit all those targets on that side, because we made some, we did some different things in the watersheds. And then as we developed the 3 alternatives, the next 3 options, if you look at the reports, we tweaked some things, we did something different. I haven't gone through back since we've gotten the model results to see what that difference is. But we did do that analysis, and we hit it the first time. Now, granted, the second time, we were running it on the full Quoit Bay as well, so there may have been some additional nitrogen that, as you see, coming back up through from the main body.
Right.
And I don't know what that impact is, or what, you
No,
know.
it was the effect of the main bay, the fact that we actually had numbers for what flows in now under different scenarios. So the trick is if the load of the main bay drops, then the load going into Hamlin and Yehu will drop, and you'll hit your targets. That's the take-home message of that. But I want to say one thing, just for you guys. This is a build-out scenario, so remember that for the whole bay, I don't remember what it is for these sub-embayments. For the whole bay, septic only accounts for 56% of the nitrogen load. All right? So then you go and you say, okay, well, then we go to build out. It's still only going to count for 56%, but you're going to increase everything except for the rainfall by 41%. You're going to increase basically half again, right? The impermeable, the fertilizers mainly, and the septic. So what we're doing is we're moving a piece of that 56%, but of course, the reason we're removing a piece of the 56% and running these scenarios. Tom says remove it all. You heard Jeff, that's right, I'm on board. But you have all this additional load that you're not removing, that you put in there, but you're not removing. And that's one reason you're having problems. You have all these other loads that go up when you build a house that aren't just the wastewater load. Okay, so that's a significant part of your problem. Okay, but what you miss is you're really close, but it's build out.
Yeah.
And one of these times I'm going to make everybody chant, build out is a fantasy. You don't really know what's going to happen when it's all done. You do, but I
Well, the problem is, again, with Jehu and Hamlin Pond, they're already built out.
Yeah,
I mean, we're
Hamlin Pond
just
is,
about
but you
there
had-
on both of them, and those are the worst ones in
Did
terms of the
Hamlin make it?
results. No.
No, I think Hamlin and Jehu were the two that didn't. I mean, one of them was like 100th off.
yeah, it's like silly. It was silly off.
And then the other one was a couple hundred.
Yeah.
3 or
But that's,
I mean,
it's just way out there. So it's just, I mean, you're so close and you're dealing with build out. Whereas, all of a sudden you do, a fertilizer thing, and then all of a sudden you made it. I mean, you're so close.
Brian,
Can you go back for a second to that
Put in
slide
aquaculture.
with the blue and red dots where you're validating the model against the data?
Yes.
Yes.
Why is the standard deviation on the data in so many cases so much bigger than that predicted by the model?
Oh, that's not the standard deviation on the model. Oh, yeah, okay, you know that. The upper triangle on the blue dots is the predicted average low tide, slow slack tide concentration. There's ways to deal with that. The solid ones are difficult because how the heck do you get them in? So a lot of people are leaning towards some of the injectable walls because then the installation costs and the permitting costs are done. But that's, I mean, you guys have people working on that. I'm going to be very interested to see what they come up with because there's tons to do and it'll be nice to see that. So I don't see a problem with permitting as long as you get them in. What was proposed for Wacoit on Seacoast Shores was fundamentally dig a trench. And then when it wasn't dig a trench, it was dig a zillion little trenches. And then it was dig trenches and pump it inland. And then, I mean, it goes like that. So it was a design issue, not necessarily the fact that the concept of permeable reactive barriers is a bad one. It works. We know. We use it in Superfund sites. We used it at Schumett for phosphorus. It works. But it has to be done right, like everything else in the world. It's how you do it, not just, that you do it. Same with aquaculture.
There you go.
Right? It's how you do it, not just that you throw some spat in the water and run away, right?
Brian, I'd like to say a few things to our colleagues in Mashpee here, because it's the first time we've met officially, and it's high time we've met officially.
Maybe the last time.
Well, it won't be the last time. But Falmouth has 14 estuaries. We have about a third of all the estuaries on Cape Cod, and most of them are just ours. We don't share them with anybody. The one we share with you is Waquoit Bay, and until tonight, we haven't had the detailed information about Waquoit Bay that you've had for a very long time. So you're way ahead of us as far as thinking about Waquoit Bay and thinking about the trouble spots and thinking about what to do with them. And we need to catch up. Waquoit Bay has been important to us, but in the absence of having detailed numbers, it's been hard to address it in a detailed way. We have a couple of advantages here. One is that we're sharing the same consultant, and we're going to download his brain on this so that we can get up to speed as soon as possible as to what the opportunities are in Waquoit Bay. But it is a huge estuary, and a complicated one, and an important one to the town of Falmouth. And, frankly, the idea that there are other towns that are going to be interested, there may be other towns interested, but your town and our town are the abutters. And we're going to be the responsible parties here, and we're going to work this out together.
Hello from Sandwich, too.
With you, and we're looking forward to that.
I do want to say one thing for the people in Mashpee that are listening. You hear all this stuff about the scenarios that were run, you didn't hit the target. Please remember, you didn't hit the target when you increased the load over existing conditions by half again as much as it is today. If you did this, you would hit the target, and you would hit it for a long time until build-out reached close to the end, and then you might go over, and you might not. So it's not like, oh, we didn't hit the target, we're done, that's it. It's like, no, you actually fully restored the system, and you probably restored it for 20 or 30 years before you finally got to the end. And I think that's important. We're worried about forever. Of course, there is no forever in this game, but we're worried about long term. A lot of people are worried about the next 20, 30 years. If they invest in this to do it, will they get a fully restored system in the short term? Yeah, they will. Not a fully all Waquoit, but this is just the Hamlin-Yehu part of the system.
Brian, we talk about low-hanging fruit, and this is our first opportunity to look at the Falmouth side of the Waquoit Bay, but I know you've been thinking about this for 10 years. Can you kind of point us towards some opportunities that we ought to think about more than others on our side of the bay?
Yeah, I mean, the Charles River, because it affects the main bay more than some other things do, and it has some potential, I believe, although it doesn't jump out at me what. It may have some potential for some other types of interception, and I'd have to check to see what the regulatory stuff is on that land. But and then the Eel River system also, the upper part of that is really not too far over the edge, and that might be something. The nice thing with Waquoit, I said it in the beginning, I want to emphasize it here, it's such a big bay with these tribs that it's almost like the tributary systems are quasi-independent. They're not independent. We can see that. I just said Giles River affects the main bay. Fine. We know that all of them affect, well, Giles, Quashnet, Hamlin, and Yehu affect the main bay. But it means that you might not have to say on day one, let's try to do it all. Let's focus on this tributary and not that one for whatever reason is the proper for your community. Or maybe you want to do both half. It doesn't matter. But I would be focusing on these upper regions, especially Giles, because you'd get the bang for the buck in the main bay. You'd get it at the head of the bay. Mm-hmm. And that would be neat. Get a twofer. But we can talk more about that.
Don't leave out Hamlin Pond. That's
well, no, I mean, and
but if you
affect the head of the bay, then you affect the main bay, and you affect the nitrogen going into Hamlin.
It struck us because the last time we talked, this is a couple of years ago. What's the easiest one to get back to where it was? Hamlin Pond was the last one that went, and it was sort of like Hamlin Pond may be the best one to bring back. That involves both towns.
When we ran those scenarios, did we run build out for Falmouth and do those build out scenarios?
For
The last set of
portions that
Hope
are
so.
moved by database, not, well, it's built out for all of them.
Yeah, but I mean, so therefore it was build-out load from Falmouth and build-out load from Mashpee?
Right.
Okay, so there's part of your answer to why it didn't hit this time. We didn't have build-out for Falmouth last time. So what you're doing is now you're looking at the build-out results when you only work within the Hamlin, Yahoo, and some Quashnet watersheds, and yet all the load for the whole bay, from all of Falmouth, from Childs, from the Eel River, all that load in the main bay, all is increasing. It's all increasing. So the concentration from the main bay is increasing going into Hamlin. At build-out, for your build-out, it was a build-out scenario. We didn't touch Falmouth over there. So, of course, you're trying to fix these only by fixing them and you made it pretty much. I mean, we can kind of agree we made it.
I can see the quizzical look on Tom's face.
Yeah, I did
No,
too,
we-
and I was trying to figure out how I could make it more.
We sewered all of Falmouth's portion as well as
They're
our portion.
talking, they're talking all of the entire
Bay.
Quoit Bay watershed,
Yeah,
so.
I'm not.
And I know, I understand that you're not thinking about the Falmouth side of just Falmouth's portion, Eel River, Childs River. But what they're saying is all that load and all that build-out load, when they ran the model the first time, and correct me if I'm wrong, you created a mini model of just the eastern portion and kind of ignored, put a big piece of paper over the whole rest of Quoit Bay proper.
Yeah, and they assumed the level of water quality that was coming in from the
But
bay.
when they ran the model the second time and we didn't meet the thresholds in those two embayments, they now took all the data from the whole rest of Falmouth, ran the model, and that had an impact on the entire bay, which also came back up, as you can see when you ran the cool little
I
stuff
love
that showed the flux going in and out. You could see that nitrogen coming back in, and that was part of the reason why those, as we're having the discussion today, didn't meet under this new run, because they never ran what happens when the rest of Falmouth keeps doing what it's doing without addressing anything.
Yeah, we didn't have the build-out for Falmouth that is within the Quoit watershed.
So it was a very conservative run. So presuming that Falmouth, as part of facilities planning and whatever, at some point would be addressing parts of Quoit Bay, that would have an impact, and it would also, as they run the whole model, the scenario really would be a scenario that would show what Falmouth might do sometime in the future, what Mashpee might do under a build-out condition, and then you'd see the impact on both.
And that's the real thing you want to do anyway, because what that does is that everybody can sort of refine their load reduction, because Falmouth benefits from the reduction in the Quashnet in a huge way, and it also benefits from the reduction in Hamlin and Yahoo in a lesser degree, because they all contribute to the main. So you would remove less in that case. Okay? As hard as I try to make you an optimist, it's just not working.
It's impossible. You're wasting your time.
I think you're right.
You haven't heard the bad news yet. You're getting fired, so. That's some other time.
Well, we do have a new chancellor. Do you know something I don't know?
The town of Mashpee is working with Barnstable and Sandwich on an intermunicipal agreement. We actually have county funding to have Mike Domenica draft intermunicipal agreements between Mashpee and the surrounding towns. Now, he's been working on the Papaneset one for a number of years, which still hasn't come to fruition, but part of his task is really to do a similar thing for Mashpee, Sandwich, and Falmouth relative to meeting Quoit Bay TMDLs. So at some point, I think Mike ought to be talking to you guys or whoever is in power in Falmouth to start talking about that. And Brian, at some point, we're going to need a similar exercise to what we had in Papaneset Bay through the pilot project to establish what is an equitable share of the target loads to allocate to each town in terms of responsibilities. So what we've done in Papaneset was there were It was basically a watershed-wide reduction of nitrogen load had built out that was, well, a reduction of nitrogen load that was required to meet the target. And as a result, that was split. How do we split it? By the portion of the, no, by the load coming in 2001. It was a 2001 model for Papaneset. And so each town got the same percentage of load as where they were contributing in 2001. That was their percentage of the target load in the bay. And that's the basis for the intermunicipal agreement that we're working on with Barnstable fairly successfully there, and with Sandwich, who's still, you know, Sandwich is hard because they don't benefit, they only contribute nitrogen in both of these cases. But we need to do a similar thing with you guys, and just wanted to put that on the table. And Jerry, have you, yeah, you want to use the mic? Sure. Yeah. I know we can hear you, but never sure if the television audience.
Thomas, Town of Falmouth. Basically, what you're talking about is the water quality trading. You pay for the amount of nitrogen you
no, I mean,
contribute.
What it is you have to establish everybody's piece of the target in order to be able to do that, ultimately. That was the pilot project, was supposed to demonstrate, you know, intermunicipal cooperation, and it was EPA funded, so EPA was interested in seeing how a water quality nitrogen trading system might work. And in order to get there, we had to come up with, well, how much load is each town supposed to take out, and then start talking about trading. And it's all complicated by natural attenuation in the ponds and everything else. But we did that. We came up with some numbers. And at some point, we need to do a similar thing with Falmouth.
I think we can do it, but just prepare yourself.
Yeah, this sounds like a planner's dream. At 9:45 at night, it's probably not one we're going to be able to take up.
This is a 3-month exercise.
Yeah, no, I'm
just the meeting.
Putting that on the table. That was on the agenda, by the way. You saw that.
I did, and that's our response.
Like Pompanesett, which you want to use as a model, you have to do it for each one of those stations. So you're not going to...
Yeah, see, we had one target for Pompanesett, and we don't.
We have a lot on our plate, and we'll put that on the list.
Yeah, just so I clarify, when you say each one of those stations, you mean each one of these little dots?
Just like there's Sentinel stations.
Sentinel stations.
Yes, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and maybe 6. So for Poppy, there's 1.
Ah,
and so
okay.
you had all the loads coming to a single point.
Yeah.
In this one now...
Yeah, one TMDL for Poppy. We have a TMDL for Hamlin Pond. We have a TMDL for Zayu Pond, Great River.
Got it.
You know, another one for
Okay.
Unicus. So, yes, you're right. It is going to be more complicated. But for the ones that we share, I think we need to figure out how we're going to treat each of our citizens fairly in terms of who picks up the load.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Brian.
Yes, thank you, Brian.
Yes, that was good.
He's almost done with Falmouth, if he can just get Bourne to play ball.
Now, I don't know if there's areas for cooperation in terms of the shellfish, but you should know that our shellfish constable is proposing a fairly massive program of installing clams, quahogs in Jayu Hamlin Pond in those estuaries to try to meet our targets. And if there are areas where Falmouth and Mashpee can work together on that, I think one of them may be the survival of the, along with the rest of the Cape, of the guys that produce the seed. I don't know where that's going, but there seems to be an issue whether or not we'll have a... What's the status of that, Rick? The company that gives you your seed is
hasn't been
in trouble?
decided. You're talking about the ARC shellfish hatchery in
yes.
Dennis. And I believe that the issue with the wind turbine is still not resolved. I believe that's still in court. I'm not sure completely, but they're saying they're in business as far as we know.
All right. These are the ones that are trying to sell themselves to the county for $4 million?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Got it.
Well, we got to keep them there from one way or the other.
We have here, Ron and Steve and Sia have been working diligently on our own oyster project, which is to get a huge quantity of oysters in Little Pond this spring. And we'd be happy to tell you how that is coming along, but that remains the goal. I say a huge quantity, a quantity enough that you can measure the difference in nitrogen reduction, if there is some.
As you know, we're already doing oysters in Papaneset Bay, Mashpee River, and Rick's planning on a major expansion of that this year. It's been fairly successful. And are you talking about the quahogs this year? Or is that?
Yes,
Yeah.
we're planning to start a large increase in the existing propagation program for that Jehu Pond, Hamlin Pond, Little River, Great River area. And there's still about 30 acres of sandy bottom, and we could conceivably carry 30 million quahogs in there at 20 per square foot, which is only about what it used to be in the good old days of quahogging. We're only really talking about restoring the levels to what they used to be, and it's all a draft at this point, but we think we can really take out a lot of nitrogen that way. And if it's only for the purpose of cleaning it up while we're working on sewering, it's worth it for that alone. So, but we're working on it for our plan. So.
Right, and again, since we share Hamlin Pond and we're planning on doing it there, maybe there's an opportunity for Falmouth to plant some seed on their side of the pond too.
Well,
you got
their side of the pond is a small area and it's mostly muck. There's the sandy bottom. Unfortunately for Falmouth, that side is pretty dead, and it's. But if they would look at using shellfish and some of their estuaries on the other side that need remediation, that would be interesting. I haven't really looked at it. And the other thing I wanted to mention was that in Papaneset, it's the town. As Brian mentioned, it's the town and the tribe. Between the town's propagation for fishery and the tribe's shellfish farm, that project we're talking about expanding.
No, we've been following with great interest in the papers your efforts, and we've been good going.
We're going ahead big time. All right. Anything else anybody wants to say in terms of cooperation or any last questions about Brian's presentation?
Well, we're in this together with you on Wacoit Bay, and we will stay in touch. I think we can start by making sure that we each get each other's agendas, and that our consultant tells each of us what the other side is doing that might affect our own water body.
Yeah. We're in a weird situation where we're in the middle of a process where the Mashpee Water District is about to become, at some point, possibly this year, a water and sewer district, and we will disappear. And mainly because they've not been willing to participate in our planning process. Our whole planning process may disappear as well rather quickly, so that's why I say we may not see you again.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Well, unfortunately,
Could I ask a question along those lines? By what legal process will you disappear and they become water and sewer?
Legislation filed by Representative Vieira that's being drafted up between our council and the Water District's council.
As a home rule petition?
Yes.
Okay. Does it have to go through town meeting first?
We already had a town meeting in Mashpee where the town voted to authorize the selectmen to go through that process.
To go through that process.
Yeah,
okay.
So it may have to go again. It depends on whether or not it has to be done again during this legislative session.
Has it been filed?
No, it hasn't been completed yet. There's some debate about who's going to pay for what or not.
Right.
Still going on, but the indication, and this is the first the other commissioners have heard about it, is that we are going to be asked to stop all of our work by the selectmen until the district takes over, and I'm not sure how that works, because when the district takes over legally, we go out of existence at exactly the same time. So,
right.
We're a little bit in limbo now, but we're all still here for now to talk to you.
Well, but
Just probably can't
isn't
do
the
much.
deadline for filing for this year?
It's gone
Yeah.
by.
It's gone by, so,
The 18th.
Well, you can late file.
Home rule petitions
There's no problem with
generally
that, but,
can file anytime.
I see, okay.
and you've had your town meeting vote, so that's a done.
Yes, unless it turns out it needs to be during the same legislative session, whether they need another vote. That was a question, was up in the air, so.
Okay.
So I was serious, this may be the last meeting
Okay.
of the Mashpee Sewer
Okay.
Commission.
Oh,
but
it's
it was great.
it's been nice meeting you.
The complex probably make it more difficult.
Good, great.
You're looking for a motion
We'll be
to
dancing
adjourn?
alone.
All right.
Second.
Well, we met until 10:30 the other night. I don't know why you guys want to go home so soon.
We usually meet after 10. Tonight, we're going to beat our own record, I think.
I'll let you-
Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Okay.
We're gone.
I make a motion to adjourn.